We come to the table with a heart for the mission. We come to the table with a passion to do what our faith tells us that we should be doing.
It is a very expensive real estate market, and the faith community has been identified as a major owner of underutilized land.
But we didn't understand what does it mean for construction. We knew nothing about engineering and all of the rules and regulations. Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative.
They walked with us through those initial years as we were acquiring the property, 2, renovating the property, and 3, ongoing management of the property.
And some of the most complicated things that I have ever seen in my life.
Financial resources, pre-development funding, and budgetary support.
But Enterprise made it look like, oh, sure, you can do this. We'll help you. We'll walk with you along the journey, whether it's policy making, whether it's financial, whether it is governmental, or whether it's regulatory. It's moving beyond just helping houses of worship build buildings.
As we add services to the housing, it begins again to lift up the community.
The housing, the healthcare, the education, the social services, the impact goes beyond just giving persons places to live. It is giving persons hope.
We are who we are in large part because of Enterprise Community Partners. They provide a forum by which faith leaders can come together in what we view as a safe space and begin to learn from one another.
So that houses of worship are all marching toward the same vision of affordable housing. When someone asks you for food, rather than simply feeding them fish, you teach them how to fish. That's how I would describe it. Because we were hungry.
The faith community now has evolved to be one of the major players providing affordable housing. Enterprise has been an indispensable partner.
For every person who believes they cannot do it, give yourself the opportunity to engage in a conversation with the Faith-Based Development Initiative.
Welcome, everybody, to the Enterprise Community Partners 2022 Faith-Based Development Initiative Annual Summit. We thank you for joining us today, for making the time to be a part of this important national dialogue. Our theme this year is Faith-Based Community Development, a national movement getting deals done. Our goal with the FBDI, as we like to call it, today is as it was when we started in 2006. Help meet community needs by getting housing and community serving facilities created on land owned by houses of worship. Our approach is to help congregations be good and faithful stewards of their land by helping them make informed go, no-go decisions. We do this by providing them with financial and technical assistance they need, dollars and cents with an S, to make the decision. And when a congregation makes the go decision, we want to help them get connected to professionals with competence and integrity. We ultimately want to build a program while nurturing a movement. Yes, we want to strengthen Enterprise's program while also going beyond the 9 markets where we are now and active today with the FBDI, while also supporting the growth and development of a national movement that includes but goes well beyond Enterprise. We want to build FBDI thinking into the code, where religious denominations and congregations, government agencies and elected officials, financial institutions, development professionals, philanthropy, and community members will all assume that houses of worship and the land they steward are potential partners in the efforts to build housing and community serving facilities, grocery stores, health facilities, daycares, local businesses that meet community needs. We want stakeholders to also think about not just what gets built and operated, but how and by whom. Who gets paid, how much, when, and how? Who gets contracts? Who learns a business? There are opportunities to focus on issues like equity, economic empowerment, sustainability, and resilience in very intentional ways with mission-aligned partners. There are literally houses of worship all across this country. This year, my colleagues and I have spoken to congregations from North Carolina to a small town in Alaska. There are needs across our country. Well, need meet opportunity, opportunity meet need, and allow us, if you will, to introduce you to radical common sense. Today, my friends, you will hear from a range of presenters and panelists that have experience in the field. We encourage you to take notes and think about how what you learn today can inform your faith-based related development work from your position, whatever it may be, in a congregation, a denomination, a government agency, financial institution, development professional, lawyer, or foundation. I want to say thanks at the beginning of our day to all of our participating panelists and moderators. And so since this is a faith-based development gathering, we would like to start with an invocation. And we are honored today for our invocation to have Pastor Fred Luter Jr., who is the senior pastor of the Franklin Avenue Baptist Church in New Orleans. In 2012, he was unanimously elected as president of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant organization in America. And he was the first African American to be elected to that position. Pastor Luter, we thank you for being with us today, and we welcome you now to bring us our opening prayer.
Thank you, Reverend Bowers. I'm so honored to be a part of this summit and to start it off with the invocation, and I appreciate the opportunity. Let us all pray. Our Father and our God, Master, we thank you and we praise you for this day that you've made. We're going to rejoice and we're going to be glad in it. Thank you, Lord, for last night's rest. Thank you for waking us up this morning and starting us on our way. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity and privilege, God, to be a part of this faith-based development initiative summit, God. This is an organization and an event that will bless so many people across our city, state, and across our nation. Bless each of the speakers. Bless all of the companies that's represented. Bless all the churches and the pastors that will be a part of this summit. We pray that the conversation and the presentations that will be presented today will be something that all of us will be able to apply to our areas of making affordable housing and community development a reality in the life of cities across this nation. We thank you in advance for all that you've done, what you're doing right now, and what you promise you will continue to do throughout this summit. This is our prayer in our Son Jesus' name we pray. Amen, amen, and amen.
Pastor Luter, thank you so much. We appreciate your work, and we thank you for bringing us that prayer.
Thank you, sir.
And now it's a privilege for me to bring on our next speaker, who is Jacqueline Wagner. Jacqueline is the president of the Enterprise Community Partner Solution Division, where she manages a team of more than 300, leading the company's programmatic, policy, and advisory work in alignment with its strategic priorities. Jacqueline has served at Enterprise since 2005, having spent time previously as the leader of the Enterprise Southern California office. And critical, even more importantly for today, is that Jacqueline has been a longtime serious supporter of the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative. Jacqueline, I thank you for your support. Your presence here, as in past years of our summit, is greatly appreciated. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Pastor Luter, for that invocation. I appreciate the warm introduction. Let me add my welcome to the annual Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative Summit. Let me also thank our sponsors for this year's summit: Wells Fargo, Capital One, PNC, Care First, Blue Cross, and Blue Shield. We appreciate your support of this important work. It's encouraging to have people from various sectors and geographies across the country joining us today. As you know, Enterprise continues to focus on expanding housing supply, advancing racial equity, resilience, and upward mobility in communities across this country. Excitingly, as we work towards these priorities, I'm pleased to report that much has happened since we last met. FBDI is what we call it, is now a national program of Enterprise, garnering national coverage with our program expansion and launch in Atlanta earlier this year, thanks in large part from today's sustaining sponsor, Wells Fargo. who is providing multi-year support for our work in 6 cities. With the additional support of a range of companies and local government partners, this national expansion means we are also on track to have cohorts operating in 8 jurisdictions in 2023, with over 115 houses of worship, deliver an estimated 8,500 plus new affordable homes with their development partners. This is a critical time for our nation and our industry. We continue to see pressing needs for affordable housing and community support facilities, such as affordable daycare, health clinics, grocery stores for low and moderate income Americans across this country. Thankfully, as we have seen through the pandemic, houses of worship continue to rise to the occasion, providing a range of support to people each week. As such, we recognize how this support can extend to meet the housing needs of individuals and families by way of houses of worship, also utilizing their land for development projects. So on behalf of Enterprise Community Partners, you have my commitment that we will continue the work we started with the FBDI in 2006 to collaborate and partner with you all to bring our platform of development experience and expertise to the table, including programming, financing, and development. In closing, please know we appreciate all of you for the work you're already doing in this space, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you in this arena to increase the impact that houses of worship and their partners have in meeting critical housing and community needs. Enjoy the dialogue. We're excited to have you here. Good day.
Jacqueline, thank you so much. And thank you again for your continued support. It means so much to us to have such a senior leader in the company really believing us at our core. So we thank you for being here, and thanks for your continued support. So now, my friends, we are honored to have with us Mayor Muriel Bowser. This week, Muriel Bowser was reelected to a 3rd term as mayor of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. In 2018, she became the first woman ever reelected as the mayor of Washington and the first mayor to earn a 2nd term in over 16 years. Her administration has made historic investments in affordable housing, and in the last 2 years has provided financial support for 2 multi-year FBDI cohort efforts in DC that will provide support for 29 houses of worship, 29 that are looking to develop affordable housing on their properties. Let us now hear from Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Hello, this is Muriel Bowser, Mayor of Washington, D.C., and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Enterprise Community Partners Annual Faith-Based Development Initiative Summit. I want to congratulate Enterprise on coming together to strategize around these important issues. I am proud that my administration is supporting Enterprise as you work with nearly 30 houses of worship to create more than 2,000 new affordable homes. And we know there is more to come. Just recently, we created a Black home ownership strike force and funded a $10 million Black home ownership fund. And our faith community will play a critical role in realizing the goals we set and the investments we make. As you participate in this summit, I encourage each of you to think about the role you can play in transforming underutilized land into much needed affordable housing and other community resources. Because together we can strengthen communities like DC and ensure all people have access to safe, stable, and affordable housing.
Many thanks, Mayor Bowser. We are grateful to see the leadership that Mayor Bowser and her administration have provided in the realm of affordable housing, and certainly setting a tone for how local governments can be supportive of faith-based development initiative efforts, both through policy and appropriation of dollars. So thank you again, Mayor Bowser, for being here and for your leadership in this space. We are going to go a little bit down 95 South now to Miami-Dade. Daniela Levine Cava was elected Miami-Dade County's first ever woman mayor in November of 2020. She entered the mayor's office following a nearly 40-year career as a relentless advocate for South Florida families in public service and elected leadership. As Miami-Dade County's mayor, she oversees a metropolitan government with more than 28,000 employees serving nearly 3 million residents, managing an annual budget of approximately $9 billion. Her administration has provided support for local coalitions of houses of worship developing affordable housing, including affordable home ownership opportunities for Miami-Dade residents. A social worker, lawyer, and community activist, we welcome Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava.
Hello, Faith-Based Development Annual Summit. I am Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava. Although I can't be with you all in person, know that I greatly admire the work you are doing, and I am so proud to be virtually welcoming this summit. In Miami-Dade, we work closely with many faith-based groups who have been there during times of disaster, who are deeply dedicated to utilizing land for affordable homes and community facilities, and who are on a pillar in our county for folks to lean on. Our county has committed more than $500 million to affordable housing programs in our latest budget, with $85 million for our newest housing initiative, which includes new resources for mortgage relief, projects that have been stalled due to the pandemic, and weatherization efforts, and more. We also assembled a new $80 million impact pool of private, public, and nonprofit capital called the Building Blocks Fund to boost the supply of affordable and workforce housing. The advisory board we formed includes Collective Empowerment Group, a group of local churches focused on affordable housing. We are thrilled that Enterprise Community Partners has expanded its faith-based initiative into South Florida with support from the Wells Fargo Foundation to help faith leaders turn underused land into affordable homes. And this collaboration between local government and faith leaders yields serious results. Over the last few years, Miami-Dade County has worked closely with faith-based groups to create over 300 affordable rental units. My administration hosted a multi-sector housing summit and roundtable focused on faith-based partnerships for affordable housing, and we have committed $3 million in local housing funds to faith-based developers. Together, we'll keep this important work going. There is much more to be done, but we have proven time and time again a prosperous, housing-secure future is possible.
Thank you so much to Mayor Cava for your remarks. Your commitment to affordable housing and your support of faith-based community development are another great example of why government partnerships are so important to creating homes and community serving facilities for our low-income neighbors. We so appreciate you being part of today's event. I am now very happy to introduce our next speakers. Patrick Jordan is the president of Heron Community Consulting. He's joining us today and will provide us with some important context, presenting on the faith-based development landscape. Patrick, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to share. That's great. Slides are up. Thank you so much. So I've been asked to come and talk a little today about how deals are coming together. And I've been working with a team to examine projects developed by houses of worship and their partners to assemble case studies on what's working well and where there are challenges. So we looked across the landscape of several successful projects for some trends to answer. How are these projects coming back together? If you could go back to the prior slide. There are three themes that we've seen across these projects, really, and they are vision, tenacity, and teamwork. And by vision, what we're talking about is that all of these projects have started with a view of something different. It may be that a house of worship sees clearly the need for housing to be affordable in their community, or it may be from a different perspective. Maybe it's around broader community development or the need to improve community health. It could also be that the house of worship has been through a period of discernment and is more focused on how to establish some financial stability, or even to manage a move or a sale of their site. But in doing so, they've come together to develop some clarity on their community goals and their financial goals. These projects often come from very different starting places and different approaches to the choices that have to be made through the development process. One of those most foundational choices is whether to own the development in partnership, or to sell a portion or all of their land, or to enter into a long-term lease. It's a very personal decision for a congregation with pros and cons that are unique to a house of worship. And these projects each include a story about how they came to their decisions. Another part of vision is really making sure that there's a successful way for a project to rub that vision against reality, to evolve into a workable project. Rarely does a successful project end exactly where the congregation had expected, as that vision evolves to address the obstacles that they meet through implementation of their plan. It's also important to recognize that a wish list is not a vision. A vision may start with a list of things you want to see, but that list needs to be prioritized. And there needs to be an openness to letting go of certain aspects that may prove to be less feasible or less aligned with the overall project mission. And then another thing we see is the power of to revitalize, reinvigorate, or even around rebirth. Many houses of worship are seeing both first and second order consequences of a project, whether it be that the housing they developed helps to revitalize the block that they're on, or that it helps to reinvigorate a congregation and attract new members through this process of development. Second, tenacity. So even successful projects face challenges. We've been told you will face challenges, trials and tribulations. It will be a matter of when and where and how many, not if. This really is a part of the process. It's not unique to development by houses of worship. Much of development, particularly affordable development, is about solving problems and overcoming obstacles. Having spoken with leadership across many affordable housing developers, many of their leaders like to say, hey, we do too many deals with hair on them. And our response is, what deal doesn't have hair on it? When's the last time you did a bald deal? And they usually nod their head in agreement and acknowledge that those projects really are the unicorns. And lastly, we say that patience and understanding of the process are also key. Many things in the development process will be unique to your experience. So for example, what, if any, approval process is there from your institutional hierarchy? How will you bring along your congregation? Those are examples of things that you will know best and are part of your process in pulling a project together. And then the third key theme is teamwork. We like to say that development for a house of worship is both very hard and eminently doable. And there are multiple ways and pathways to building your team. But there do seem to be a couple of non-negotiables that we've seen in successful projects that have come together. There's a need to work with your development partner to build trust. It helps when your development partner has done a project with another house of worship. There are some developers who specialize or have a concentration in faith-based development, joint ventures. And many of the successful projects we've seen are examples of a certain mission-based developer that has worked over several projects, has learnings, has shared those learnings with us and with others. In interviewing those developers with an interest in a neighborhood, you can also find where there may be an opportunity to acquire land or to find land beyond land you may already have control of. And those who have completed successful projects have told us they were aware of other projects that their development partner may have done. They may have been aware of projects that other developers have done, and they may have modeled certain aspects, but they followed their own path. They prayed, they persisted, and in the end, they realized their visions. So here are three, on this next slide, projects that exemplify vision, tenacity, and teamwork. So for an example of vision, right, one that we thought really stood out was the project Plaza West by Bible Way Church and Mission First Development that highlighted ways in which in Washington, D.C., a community could support grand families. More than 1,000 families were led by grandparents. This was an intergenerational housing development that allowed for grand families to stay together. A second example, tenacity. Victory Square. Victory Square was a site on which there had been a former cemetery that was certified as being cleared in 1960. In fact, it had not been cleared. And it ended up taking about a year for archaeologists to hand sift that site and to reinter the remains at a different location. And both the church and the development team had to work through legacy issues of a project that had been on that site aside from the cemetery. So it's one of the best examples we've seen of tenacity and a desire to stick to it and make sure the project gets done regardless of a really challenging obstacle. And then the third one around teamwork, we thought Gilliam Place was a great example. This is one in which Arlington Presbyterian and APA, Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, looked at the evolving mission of that church, went through a years-long discernment process before deciding to partner together. They really actually spent about a year refining that agreement, and had to work with the regional church governance to figure out how could this project be most beneficial and how could they do it in line with what the Presbyterian Church in the region was open to seeing. So those are three examples of projects that really exemplify vision, tenacity, and teamwork. And those are what we're seeing in projects that are coming together as some key themes. Christy, I think, are you on mute, Christy?
I sure am. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. What I was saying was thanks so much for that. What you've just presented definitely fits within the context of today's summit title. Faith-based development is clearly a national movement. Thank you for your partnership and working with houses of worship across the country to support their affordable housing development visions.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And on that note, I'm now pleased to introduce our next presenter. Paul Propson is the CEO of Catholic Charities of Southeast Michigan. Paul will speak with us about some examples of faith-based development led by Catholic Charities and the broader faith community in the great city of Detroit. Paul, thanks so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christy. It's such an honor to be here. We do represent the city of Detroit, which is a city of churches. And we're really new to this development work. We're really blessed to have joined this community of developers because we have the right partners. And I really think Patrick's presentation did a great job of kind of talking about teamwork. I think that's so important. Our story in Detroit starts with Catholic Charities USA. We can go to the next slide. Catholic Charities USA developed their Healthy Housing Initiative several years ago, and they have three goals that they set out to accomplish across the country: to reduce chronic homelessness in 5 U.S. cities by 20%. And Detroit was one of those 5 cities that was selected for their pilot project. To decrease hospital readmission rates for the chronically homeless by 25%, and to connect 35% of those housed with primary and behavioral health care providers. We go to the next slide. So this is a great vision that Catholic Charities USA had, because they were able to see that there were allies that were naturally available in these cities like ours in Detroit. And that is Catholic Charities, which we provide social services around our community. But Ascension Health is a Catholic health system that provides medical care around the city and is relied upon by so many people in Detroit. And of course, the Archdiocese of Detroit, which is a property owner. So those three, as well as being a church, but has so many properties in the city, particularly schools, which no longer are as active as they were years ago. So you have a great social service provider concerned with the homeless, a healthcare provider, Ascension Health, that's committed to serving the homeless and already sees many homeless individuals in their hospital. And then the Archdiocese, which has properties that can be converted to housing. So we go to the next slide. Here, we're going to spend a little time on this slide. We're talking about our partners. So this is kind of the teamwork, I think, that Patrick was talking about. For us, Catholic Charities USA was sort of inviting us into a community of developers that we knew nothing about. We were completely new to this. 3 years ago, we hadn't even heard of something like low-income housing tax credits. And yet, low-income housing tax credits, which are provided through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority in Michigan, that was the goal. So getting from we desire to provide permanent supportive housing to the chronically homeless to a project that receives low-income housing tax credits, that was sort of the distance that we had to cover. And so the way that that Catholic Charities USA helped us was the first thing they did was they introduced us to Melinda Clemens at Enterprise Community Partners. And Enterprise entertained our proposal for pre-development funds, which we've actually gotten a few grants through Enterprise, which has really helped lead us through this process. One of the things that the funds were able to do was to help us engage a consultant. So again, Catholic Charity staff, Tim Carlbay especially, introduced us to Joe Heafy at Ethos Development Partners, and Joe was our guide locally. So we had a lot to offer in developing permanent supportive housing, but we would have had no opportunity to take what we had to offer and put it to use without a guide like Joe at Ethos. Joe then, together with Catholic Charities, went to Ascension, and we explained the vision, and Ascension was fully on board with transforming lives of chronically homeless individuals, providing housing with supportive services, and especially medical care. From there, we found a co-developer in Sinair who, again, fully came along with this project. They have experience, and I'll tell you about that on another project further down in the presentation. And together, we were able to approach the city of Detroit. Their commitment of home funds, $3 million of home funds to this affordable housing, permanent supportive housing development. We would never would have been able to get the low-income housing tax credits without that commitment from the city of Detroit. So there again, these are partners here in our city that fully embraced permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless. You can go to the next slide. All right, so here's where we landed. We landed at St. Matthew School, which is on the east side of Detroit, and it has been closed for about 20 years. It was a wonderful Catholic school for probably 50 years. Among those years, one of their students was my own mother, and it was always something that I thought of as a beautiful place. And in another slide, you'll see just how lovely the church is. The parish is still active there on the east side of Detroit. It is very close to Ascension St. John Hospital. And here in May 2020, with our partners, we established the vision for housing with access to primary and behavioral health care on site. The residences at St. Matthew is the transformation of a former Catholic school into a permanent supportive and affordable housing facility that is co-located with medical and wellness services in the Morningside neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan. We go to the next slide. So permanent supportive affordable housing, this is an adaptive reuse of St. Matthew Catholic School and the adjacent annex. It's little two buildings. You might be able to see them in the overhead view. The larger building in red is the school, and then there's a smaller building with a white roof. The parish, you can see the beautiful church with the two towers there, and you can see it in the overhead image as well. So 46 units of housing will be provided there in St. Matthew. Each classroom is essentially turned into an apartment. There'll be 6 studios, 36 one-bedrooms, and 4 two-bedrooms. We are not quite ready to open. We'll be having it completed in a little over a year. So we're just kind of in the middle of this process now. Of those 46 units, 25 units are dedicated for the permanent supportive housing. And among our partners in this that I didn't list on the team is our Continuum of Care, Homeless Action Network of Detroit. And so there again, that's a critical partner if you're going to provide services to the chronically homeless, your Continuum of Care in your city. The remaining 21 units are available for affordable housing in the community. And as we've engaged with people in the neighborhood, one of the things that is most important to them is that they be brought into the people they care about in their neighborhood who need an apartment can find out about these apartments as soon as they become available. Also, a very important part of this development is the community wellness, healthcare, and service space available in what was the school gymnasium. And so that is going to be a community space with healthcare and wellness programming available to residents, to those who were formerly homeless, as well as to the community. You can go to the next slide. One of the things that was a great asset having Ascension as a healthcare partner was they were able to look at their hospital emergency department use and see that the zip code that St. Matthew in is one of the most high utilizers of their emergency department, and also that many of the visits to the emergency department are not always appropriately using. So having services available at the school for healthcare needs is going to potentially reduce improper use of their emergency department. Next slide. As we were able to kind of hit the goal line with an award of low-income housing tax credits from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, the mayor, Mayor Duggan, who was very invested in this project and actually was baptized at St. Matthew. He came out and announced the commitment from both the city and the state, and we had a lot of publicity, which was good for all the partners. Moving to the next slide. So I don't want to give you the wrong idea. We were not the innovators. We come late to the party of faith-based development, and many churches and faith-based community organizations have preceded us in Detroit. And so I'm just going to tell you about 3 of the developments that are currently recently completed or currently underway, which I think speak a little bit to the diversity of projects and also have inspired us at Catholic Charities. Next slide. So Transfiguration Place is also the conversion of school to apartments, a former Catholic school in nearby St. Matthews, actually. And a lot of the same teammates of ours worked on that. So Ethos and Sinair. And they have really shown with City as a partner as well that this was possible. So the success of Transfiguration Place, turning that school into affordable housing, helped to establish in all of the people that we approached, here is a model that we are basing our work at St. Matthew's on. You can move to the next slide. The Cathedral Arts Apartments is a very exciting project. It's actually on land. So whereas the 2 school housing developments that I spoke of are adaptive reuses of the school, here we have this is just land that was across from our Blessed Sacrament Cathedral in Detroit. And the developer, MHT, worked with the parish at the cathedral to develop a plan for affordable housing, which is going to beautify that neighborhood, create more community near the cathedral, and has the full support of folks in the community. MHT has done a wonderful job on this project, and I'm very excited to see this developing. It is 53 two-bedroom units and 6,000 square feet of commercial retail space. Next slide. Finally, the Jim Holly Residences is named after historic Little Rock Baptist Church's longtime leader. So just to show you, it's not all Catholics doing the development. In fact, most of our faith-based development in Detroit is from other faith-based leaders than us Catholics. But the Jim Holly Residences is transforming an area on the north end of Detroit on Woodward Avenue in a beautiful way, creating affordable housing with 5,000 square feet of commercial space. And we've been really delighted to follow that project as it works to create housing that's affordable in our city. So I thank you so much for inviting me to be here. If you have questions or comments, my information is available there. And I'd be happy to help you if you're also at the beginning of your faith-based development journey like we are. We really have come a long way because of great partners like Enterprise. And thank you for this time today.
Paul, thank you so much. We really appreciate that real practical overview of real tangible projects and how they're getting done, how they got done, and really appreciate the crosswalk between what Patrick laid out in his presentation about vision, tenacity, and teamwork, and the examples that you provided. You really helped lay a great groundwork for us for the rest of our conversations today. So thanks again, Paul. We appreciate you. So again, thanks to Patrick and Paul for laying that foundation for our conversations coming. So now we're going to go into our first panel conversation as we get into a conversation about the nuts and bolts, right, of getting these projects done. Our moderators for this panel are Victoria Rowe Barreca, my colleague, Director at Enterprise Community Partners, Director, and we also have with us Ed Delaney. And Ed is a longtime friend of ours from Capital One. Capital One has been a longtime supporter for us of our FBDI in the Mid-Atlantic region and in some other markets that we have. And Ed himself has personally put in some time to really work with our houses of worship over the years. So we appreciate having Ed here. Our panelists for the day, Susan Etherton, who's an elder with Arlington Presbyterian Church. You heard about that project with APA in Arlington, Virginia. Reverend Canon Britt Olson, vicar at St. Luke's Episcopal Church out in Seattle, Washington. We've got Reverend Jasmine Smothers, who is the lead pastor of Atlanta First United Methodist Church down in Atlanta, Georgia. And George Damien de la Paz, who's a senior strategist for government innovation, the Office of the Mayor, Miami-Dade County, Florida. So, Tori and Ed, I'll turn it over to you and the panel.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, panelists, and thank you, everybody, for joining and participating today. I just wanted to kick this off with just a little bit of context setting. This panel will discuss mission-driven development, how different organizations approach the development process from the earliest stages of visioning in the community engagement process to finding a partner and the resources needed to get the shovel in the ground and through that construction completion. As you've heard, this process can be daunting, lengthy, and even a roller coaster. So this panel will cover the critical and foundational discernment process, how the government agencies can offer support and resources, and finding the partners and experienced professionals to support the development and bring your idea to fruition. So in terms of kicking off this conversation today, we'd first like to start from the very beginning, from the beginning of the project at that foundational visioning and discernment process, looking within the faith community as well as beyond the four walls of the church or the house of worship to the local community. So the first question I have is for Susan and others on this panel, how are houses of worship identifying needs and wants of the community? And what kinds of questions should houses of worship be asking themselves and reflecting on this as they begin this process?
Thank you, Victoria. I can start. I want to just say thank you for having us here. Gilliam Place is thriving and doing really well. So just want to put that hope out there to the community. The context of redeveloping your house of worship really begins with your relationship with your community, and that in connection with the discernment process. And in the faith-based world, discernment is really key to what we do. So you might have a really already vibrant relationship with your community, and for others, it might be the results of COVID or the changing demographics have resulted in the community being disconnected from the faith community. So it's really important to get outside the doors, and you mentioned that in your opening remarks. And I want to say it really cannot be an inward focused exercise. You can't stay within the walls of your church and imagine what you could do for the community. You need to be outside the doors in that one-on-one communication in relationship with your community, listening really for where your heart is breaking in the community and how God is connecting you with what's invited to be provided. So deep listening is probably key to the initial discernment process, finding out where you would best fit in the way you could provide services to the community.
Thanks for that. Is there anybody else who wants to? I see, yes, Britt.
I can jump in. At St. Luke's in Seattle, we're a small church that's just under contract for the development of 2 buildings, one affordable housing and one a new church space and mixed use affordable and market rate housing, along with underground parking. And then we're doing this on a ground lease. But in order to get to this place, we started in 2017. And then in 2019, we conducted a year-long appreciative inquiry process. And there are lots of different methods that are possible to use, but we chose this one because it helps you to discover what is the best about your community and about what you offer as a part of that community. We had one-on-one conversations with all our constituents, including parishioners, and our judicatory, which is called a diocese. Without that leadership, with all the people that we currently serve on site with food and shelter and a day center. We talked with volunteers, we talked with tenants and residents on the property, with neighbors, and with the gardeners who garden on our property. As Susan said, getting outside your doors doesn't just start with this process. It hopefully, for all of us who are faith communities, we're already deeply involved, long-term involved, historically involved with our communities. And we have these long-term relationships and presence that we could build on. We met with our business community and the Chamber of Commerce. We met with service groups like the Rotary and, the Eagles and those sorts of groups. We met with neighborhood organizations, and all of those one-on-one small groups and then larger summit conversations came together to form our vision, our mission, and our core values that would guide whatever decisions we make going forward. And that's been the key, is having clarity. And an earlier speaker talked about the vision being so critical. And there's so many things that are going to change. You have to be tenacious. You've got to adapt. And yet, if you have that clarity around your mission and your vision and your principles, that will guide all your decisions.
Thank you, Britt. I think we lost Tori, so I'll ask Reverend Smothers. A follow-on to that question is, how are houses of worship securing your congregational buy-in and your denominational buy-in in addition to that community support?
Yes, thank you for having me. We're United Methodists, and so there's several layers for denominational buy-in. But I do want to start with congregational buy-in. Our congregation turned 175 years old today, this year, and about 4 years ago, we did a visioning series, Reverend Cannon Olson, and asked the church to dream about the future of the church, and asked the church to put on little index cards what they were dreaming about for the church, and what was so big that without God, it was bound to fail. And how could our church engage our community? Now, you need to know that we are the delineation between downtown and midtown in Atlanta, and we're on Peachtree Street. And if you know anything about Atlanta, you can't come through the city without being on Peachtree Street. It's our main thoroughfare. And the church had sort of retreated in over the years. And so we were trying to turn back out. Well, over and over and over again, the church said through those dream cards that they wanted to do something about homelessness in Atlanta. We'd had several people who died on the front steps of the church. And we also had somebody who was murdered on the front steps of the church. And the congregation just got to a place where they're like, we can't just stand by anymore. But they'd also had several pastors before me who talked about development. And so I think my favorite question when we had a church meeting moving toward doing development was, what makes this time different? What makes you different? And like the others have said before me, you really, really, really have to cast the vision clearly and constantly. We broke ground on our development last Sunday, and I still got an email this week that says, are we still doing this? Right? So the buy-in is literally about being clear about who you are. Who are we as the church? Who have we been? Who are we going to be in the future? And then how are we going to put teeth and work to our identity and who we choose to be. What's going to be our thing? When people pass your church, what are they going to say? Right now, they say, oh, that's the church with the big red doors, or that's the church that has the great school. But in the future, what are they going to say about the church? That's the church that made sure that people have an affordable and equitable place to live in the city of Atlanta.
Well,
Now,
never mind. Are you going to go to the denominational
yep.
buy-in?
Mm-hmm. The denominational buy-in was a little harder, okay, because development can be very expensive. And especially when you start out and you don't really know what you're doing. And that's why we're so grateful for Enterprise, because they helped us stop bleeding money and figure out what we were doing. But I had to sit down, and our lay leader and our church council chair, we all sat down with our district superintendent and with our bishop. We took our district superintendent with us on a site visit to Miami First United Methodist Church in Miami, Florida, where they were doing a similar project. And we FaceTimed our bishop from there so that she could see the vision. And then we went through the steps of all the committees, and the church kept saying, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. So you guys might as well sign off on it. And now our denomination is so supportive that sometimes we're like, whoa, this is overwhelming. Slow down a little bit.
Well, thank you for that. Brett or Susan, do you have any also follow on? We've kind of heard about how you got your community involved, but how did you get your other denominational support?
So that was a trick for us, and very similarly to what the last pastor said. And I've just lost everyone, so I can't see people's names. But we did spend a lot of time courting our diocese, because they had many failed development plans on our piece of land. And they did insist from the beginning that there would be no sale of land. And so that creates a specific kind of an agreement. And we knew that we needed to have their support, to have some upfront money to pay for the pre-development costs, which are extensive and more expensive than you can possibly imagine. And so doing a deal and getting contracts that they could see would create a sustainable development that would be there for the long term and that would serve our most vulnerable neighbors for the long term was really important. So lots of meetings. Professional presentations mattered a lot to our board, that we'd have a PowerPoint, we'd have clarity around the numbers, and that we'd have our development partners join those presentations to give confidence to our bishop and our board of directors that we had the right resources to make this happen.
So Ed, I can quickly talk about the relationship with National Capital Presbytery. And we began this process back in 2011, 2012. So it's been, and back then, back in the day, the idea of affordable housing in our presbytery wasn't even entertained. And the question of, is affordable housing a mission of the church? So I'm happy to say that if you asked National Capital Presbytery today, 10 years later, they would say it's one of our primary mission focuses. And it does take a trailblazer, the first of their kind, to begin with guts and now some glory about getting affordable housing to be a real concern of the denomination. So with respect to buy-in, we actually wanted to do a land lease with APA, and we began with that. And it appeared to our denomination to be much too risky. And so they came back and said a fee simple sale would work. And we said, great, that's even easier and cleaner. Now we don't own the land anymore, but we have a long-term lease in the ground floor retail. And it still took us a number of years to negotiate the contract and get it approved, but we found a way, and we persevered. So that idea of tenacity and teamwork really played in, and constant conversation with the denomination about why this was, in fact, the mission and ministry that was discerned by the congregation for the community.
Thank you, Susan. Jorge, I have a quick question for you. And now we have Vicki back, but and now she's gone. So how are state and local government agencies being engaged to offer support and resources?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm part of the mayor's new equity and health oversee initiatives. I want to thank Enterprise for inviting us to participate in the summit and the panelists and participants for their time. So housing has been a longstanding issue in our community, and to meet this challenge, the mayor has taken new steps to increase the supply of affordable workforce housing, while at the same time providing residents with direct relief through new housing programs. And one of the key elements of our approach has been partnering with the faith community. Over the last few years, the county has successfully partnered with faith-based organizations to build development. $13 million in combined support for these projects, which have produced more than 300 affordable housing units. And to expand these efforts, the mayor's created a new funding stream just for faith-based developments. So every year, the county puts out a competitive application for around $25 million, which combines state, local, and federal housing programs to provide gap funding for multifamily rental and homeownership projects. In the latest solicitation, we committed $3 million just to faith-based developments. So this pot of money can only be accessed by development teams that include faith-based partners. No one else can apply. We also dedicated $2 million to innovative housing projects, which is defined broadly, but it includes explicit language around using land not traditionally used for affordable housing. So that would help encourage houses of worship to partner and to build on those sites. More broadly, we've also taken various steps to make the funding process easier for small and new builders. All of our applications are now online. Our homeownership applications are available on a rolling basis for the first time. We also have additional preference points for nonprofit developers and diverse development teams. And in fact, in our last development cycle, over half the applicants were nonprofits. It's a really good change over the status quo. The other thing that we've done to really encourage this type of development is include the perspective of faith-based builders. So the mayor and our housing department have assembled a novel $80 million impact pool called the Building Blocks Fund, which is made up of private, public, and nonprofit lenders to boost the supply of affordable and workforce housing. And to help coordinate this pool, we formed a new multi-sector advisory group, which included faith leaders. We have Collective Empowerment Group, which is a consortium of local houses of worship on this advisory board. And they're providing us critical feedback on deal flow, impediments, and potential funding opportunities. So I think there's three ways that public agencies can really encourage this type of development: by committing funding sources, by making funding easier to access new builders, and also incorporating their perspectives in the planning process. The other thing that we're really excited about is that Enterprise, our support foundation, is giving their technical support to houses of worship to build affordable housing in South Florida. And we hope that this investment, paired with the county's increasing support, will create a launch pad for even more faith-based development of affordable housing in our community.
Well, thank you, Jorge. It sounds like best practices that would be great if they could be emulated in other communities.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Sure.
Atlanta First would not be developing without the city of Atlanta. We have a new-ish mayor, and he has also launched a faith-based development initiative. He actually launched it at our church. And the city has taken on radical change to be able to fund faith-based development in partnership with the city, Atlanta Housing, Invest Atlanta, and private funding. So I want to say kudos to Jorge and their team in Miami, because we would not be able to do what we're doing without the support of the city of Atlanta here.
That's wonderful. It's always it's important to have the local support, because these deals are so difficult to do and they need so much soft money. We're not actually going to get into that in this panel, but as everybody who's doing development now, even for-profit developers have found, without local support, these developments just won't get off the ground. So I have a question for, I guess, any of the houses of worship, because this is an important question for me as a lender and an investor, as to who your partners are. So how are houses of worship selecting development partners? What due diligence do you do? What issues are being evaluated, and what processes are being used? And what role or engagement would you also have when you're selecting your partner with the local agencies? It looks like we lost Jorge again, but hopefully we'll get him back.
I'd be happy to start with that because we're so fresh, having just done that in the last year. We began with identifying our need for a real estate professional to help us meet our goal for providing as much affordable housing as possible for families and providing a new and functional space for our church. We're getting about 14,000 square feet and an income stream for the next 100 years. So we needed to retain control of the land. So we needed to get a team that was experienced in ground lease, experienced in affordable housing, experienced in market rate and mixed use housing. In order to do that, we interviewed many different brokers and asked them about their experience. That was a key question. A lot of them said, oh yeah, we can do this. But if they didn't have experience already doing it, we were less likely to choose them. We also determined that we wanted our real estate team to work for a fee for service rather than as a commission. And this was really important to us. We learned this by interviewing other churches ahead of time. We know that usually the motto in the industry is the highest and best use of property. But our motto and our mission and our purpose was different. We want to do well by doing good. So that means that we might give up some of the value, the monetary value in a deal in order to get what we wanted in terms of the most affordable housing. So we needed a broker that works on a fee for service rather than commission, because they will be less interested in getting the highest price or the highest deal that they would get commission on, but rather that they would work according to our timeline and our budget. Our real estate professional completed 2 separate RFPs, one with a market rate and one with an affordable housing developer. They met our targets and they came in a little less than their original estimate of what their cost would be. So I cannot stress enough the importance of a competitive process for engaging your professionals. Churches, we too often go with who we know or a friend or someone in the congregation or someone we trust. All our contracts with our owner's representative, our legal counsel, and our architect were the result of multiple interviews and an RFP process. So we looked for experience that aligned with our values and our aesthetics, and that has made all the difference in the world.
Well, thank you, Britt. Susan, in thinking about how you built your team, who are the important professional partners needed to start the development planning and consideration, and how do you resource the pre-development expenses associated with your partners?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. The development of a team and putting a project like this together can't be emphasized enough. Having the right folks working with you and for you. And again, we did this we began quite a few years ago, and so didn't have a lot of experience in the community, but we knew that Arlington had some pretty distinctive zoning. The neighborhood initiative had just happened, and so finding a developer who really understood Arlington politics and the way Arlington County worked as far as a development partner But I would say when we first began and we first talked to the folks at Enterprise, one of the things that they helped us with was finding a real estate attorney who would, for us, was willing to do the work pro bono. So that was really helpful. And also then pointed, it's very unusual, but, thanks be to God. And also pointed us to a project manager who, again, was experienced in affordable housing and could come alongside the church and represent the church and the church's interest. So I think having really having an excellent attorney and an excellent project manager representing the church, and having some knowledge of affordable housing in your denomination or in your congregation is also helpful. So I know that's unique, and I was blessed enough to be able to bring that a little bit of that experience to the effort myself. The rest of the team were really, once we found our development partner, our developer with APA, they were the ones who brought in obviously the architects and the construction crew, because they were buying the property from us. So I would say for me, the primary partners that we worked with were our attorneys and our project manager, and then the developer.
Tori, are you back?
I'm back. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Ed, and happy to join back in again. And yeah, thinking a bit more about that. Thank you, Susan. For others on the panel, that early stage support for houses of worship to think about how to structure a deal, how to bring in development partners, access to those experts and resources is critical. And opening it up to others on this panel in terms of not just the who, but I think folks are always interested in the how. How did you find those partners, and how did you fund that if you weren't fortunate enough, as Susan was, to find some pro bono support? Were there other resources that you were able to turn to, other ways to approach this that folks around the country might be supported and inspired by? To hear from you.
Yes, our development team was a little different from anything that we've ever really done at the church. We put together a sort of pre-development team that was a third church members, a third subject matter experts, and a third community partners. And that's where being very active in your community makes all the difference in the world. So most of those community partners came out of community initiatives that I was involved in, like Leadership Atlanta, or faith-based gatherings of other community leaders. And like there's a faith-based group that meets with business leaders in Atlanta. And so those people came from those places and really helped us to think about and to see development from a perspective that we had not really thought about. So our RFP ended up being very different than what we thought it was going to be when we started out. In terms of other resources, Enterprise really helped us to find pre-development resources through Enterprise and through other initiatives that give money for pre-development, like Invest Atlanta and Mercy. And there's another group here that I'm kind of blanking on right now, because before we found those, we were just spending all the reserve money that we had to do this. And that's just not feasible for a lot of churches. I might even say most churches. So I would encourage people to reach out to Enterprise and also to reach out to your state and government officials. Our city council rep was very helpful in helping us to secure funding for pre-development cost as well, because they want to see the city do well. They have a vested interest in the church developing. So if you don't know where to start, just go to your city council and start there, and they can be a really great resource for you.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect cue for Jorge. Jorge, can you tell us what your interest specifically in helping the houses of worship get this started and maybe helping them with assistance to find partners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try as much as possible to serve as a convener, to coordinate these types of deals. One interesting partner to think about too is the university system. So the University of Miami had created an online map that laid out all of the vacant and underused parcels owned by Miami's various municipalities and civic institutions. And what they had found was that in aggregate, faith organizations were some of the largest landowners in the county. We found various instances where we had houses of worship owned land that was used as surplus parking that was directly abutting municipal sites. And we thought, could we coordinate on some of those? Could we create a plan to start maximizing some of these underused assets, to build affordable housing, to build a new type of community facility, and are constantly thinking along those lines. And again, incorporating the feedback in how we do our solicitations, trying to level the playing field to benefit smaller developers, nonprofit builders, also doing smaller scale deals, right? Can we get some of our community development corporations to partner, also connecting with larger for-profit developers on some sites. And what's interesting about the 7 sites that we have funded previously is that they come in all shapes and sizes. We've had a church create an affiliate to partner on a large tax credit deal to build new affordable housing. We had a faith-based CDC renovating small-scale garden-style apartment. We had a church create a new affiliate to build affordable housing on church-owned land. So, various types of projects, and we're there to try to encourage them to scale them up. I mean, this is our goal is to really make this process more routine and easy.
Thanks for that. Yeah, just again, kind of getting back to the evaluation process. So I love the idea of talking, within and across the community, talking to other peers within the faith community and learning from one another. I think with across enterprise, we call that iron sharpens iron, and really the power of the peer network and sharing those lessons learned is really helpful in building that space of trust. So kind of digging further into that, once you have proposals from potential, pro bono or low bono real estate, a council and or others in the industry, how do you evaluate that? How do you kind of get from looking at those proposals and to a place where you're making a decision? Is there any kind of tips or best practice or lessons learned as you kind of go through that in real time to share with others here?
Absolutely. We hired a project manager to help us with that, to make sure that we weren't missing anything. And again, that was paid for with pre-development dollars. But the biggest thing for us, just like the Reverend Cannon, was the mission. We used the phrase highest and best mission. And we use the terminology a God-sized vision, that this was going to be something that Atlanta has never done before. We needed somebody who was used to, we have a 100-year-old historic sanctuary, and we needed to detach a building from it to put this up. So we needed somebody who was used to doing very creative projects, and purposing spaces and all of that. And we ended up picking the only guy, the only firm who used in their proposal the God-sized vision. And we didn't think we were going to pick him at first, but when we went through and we checked off our list of all the things in the RFP, and we talked to them some more, they ended up being the very best partner for us, and they have continued to be the partner. We also asked the city housing person to help us look at it. We asked a couple of other churches to help us look at it as well, because this was a developer who had not built in Atlanta before, and that really made us nervous. But it turned out to be absolutely the best decision for our process. So I would say, don't be very clear in your RFP, and then don't be unapologetic about what's in the RFP as you're going through and interviewing based on proposals and all that, because what's on that paper is pretty much what you're going to get. And we also had people help us to evaluate for feasibility of what people were proposing, because some people propose things that just aren't possible to do in Atlanta because of the land or because of other building restrictions that we have in Atlanta. And that let us know that they didn't do their research, and we didn't want somebody who wasn't going to do the work, the real work. So don't just look at the RFP and on the surface say, oh, this is close enough. Get subject matter experts to check feasibility with codes and all of that as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yes, Reverend Olson.
Yeah, it's so many good points made by Reverend Jasmine. But one thing I would say is it's expensive. And I totally agree that having professionals that can review the RFPs with you, your owner's rep or your project manager to review it with you. But we will probably have spent close to $1 million before we even get to the construction phase, and sometimes much more. And one of the things that many churches don't realize, churches like the church in Atlanta and our church, we sit on extremely valuable property. And sometimes churches undervalue their property. So the first thing is to get a clear value, get a property estimate of what the value of the land is and what your zoning is, so that you know what you're dealing with. But we also wanted to have a long-term income stream, which not every deal will do that, and not every deal can do that. But we're willing to invest some more money up front because of the 100-year ground lease that we're having. So we were able to get a loan from our diocese to do this, because it will provide income to the diocese for many years in the future. We were also able to get enterprise money, and from our larger diocese, from the Trinity Mission Real Estate Development Group, we were able to get grants. And so that helped. And then when you begin starting and getting to the lease agreement, we had earnest money that's been released to us. So that's another $400,000 to spend. And then one of the greatest tips we had on leasing our land for affordable housing, and I just share this with you because it never would have occurred to us if it hadn't have been our Trinity advisors who suggested it, is that the affordable housing is prepaying all the rent up front, and then their lease will be $1 a year for the next 100 years. So we're getting $3 million up front to help with the construction costs for finishing the church space, which will cost us about $6 million to finish the church. So all those things were important. And somebody will talk about, I think someone will talk about loans, but that's the next step for us.
Yeah, and I think kind of getting back to time and money, those are two important elements to development, and thinking about a little bit now, shifting over to the time it takes. I think we want to spend a little time there. Just thinking about how you manage the time, you manage the expectations. You need to provide space for reflection and communication, the information sharing, the discussions within the congregation, within the faith community, with the outside community. This all contributes to a meaningful and engaging process for the development timeline. And would love to hear from you, in terms of the patience and perseverance that's involved in this process. How do you build that development timeline that can align with your congregation in the engagement process, that approval process? And what's the biggest surprise around the time that you needed for the successful planning, the successful development?
Okay, the biggest surprise is it's going to take a lot longer than you think. So I don't know that we didn't have any specific expectations because this was also new to us and no one had done this in our community, let alone in our denomination and locally. We kept trying to find someone who could say this is how to do it, but we were, as I mentioned earlier, we were the trailblazers for this, and so we just spent a lot of time in prayer and just patience, trusting that our development partner was moving things along as was possible. The denomination, that slowed things up. We had some neighborhood opposition that threw us into wanting to declare our property historic, and so we had to go through that process of fighting not to be declared historic. So the willingness to just trust that, and this was our mantra, that if it's of God, it will be, and to really be willing to persevere and watch for where the doors were closing, but where also the doors were opening in the way you were pursuing this. I can't, it's not a quick fix. And so if a faith community is struggling with financial difficulties and thinks that if they do redevelopment, it's going to be something that they can quickly fix their financial concerns, I'm going to say that's probably not the best reason to pursue this. We were mission minded in the way affordable housing was a part of our mission for the community. So I will also say, just to go back to the money issue, because I know that's a real issue for a lot of churches. What we did also agree to was whatever we did put into the development costs that we expended at closing, since we were selling the property at closing, we were able to take the first, those were part of the closing costs that we got that money refunded to us from the sale. So that's another way to just ensure that you get that money back in your own coffers. So I'll just leave it there.
Like Susan said, it takes forever. And we did this in the middle of a pandemic too. So that also made our timeline a lot longer. So you have to communicate. And you have to have a lot of meetings that you don't want to have, so that people, because a lot of what happens in development is behind the scenes before you break ground. And we're into about 2 years of behind the scenes stuff, and people, they start to wonder and they start to ask questions about, is this ever going to really happen? And the question about when do we get our money back and all that. And we went the route as a co-developer, and we did a ground lease and a co-development designation. And so this project creates about 7 different streams of income when it's all said and done for the church into perpetuity. But all of that is a very complex. I spend probably about 90% of my time doing development, and we've had to order our staff and reorder our lay people and what they are responsible for, so that I can focus on development and over communicate, because people are going to think that nothing's happening or something's bad is happening, because it does take a really long time and things change all the time. And so what we decided to do, our development co-chairs, every time there was some kind of change, or once a quarter, they would release an update so that people could follow the timeline, and then they could see that things were moving along even when there really was nothing to see.
I have 2 quick tips, not a long one. The 2 things we are not doing is we're not sharing exact dates. We are sharing ranges of time on our timeline that has been created for us by our project manager owners rep. And the other thing we are not sharing is detailed architectural drawings of our church space, because it will change many, many times. And once you share those, people get they get that in their mind and they can't move off of it. So we're trying to communicate, and keep it general enough so that we can change things.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you. Just getting back to having a few minutes left here. Jorge, don't want to put you on the spot, but if there's anything you wanted to share in terms of the county and the public sector as it relates to best practices, streamlining processes, I'm sure faith organizations would love to hear how other municipalities might be inspired from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have modified our solicitation process to encourage these types of deals. We're also working really intently to make the development process easier. Again, putting our applications online, having them available on a rolling basis, providing expedited permitting, coordinating with groups to ease the pre-development process, and thinking about these lots in a more strategic way, connecting the dots, having advisor groups to coordinate deals, to think through different funding resources, and create unorthodox partners to generate even more units faster. So it is a difficult process. I don't want to undersell that, but it is doable. We've done a handful of on the affordable rental side and a number on the affordable homeownership side. And I think as we continue to build this muscle, and with enterprise providing the additional technical assistance, we'll be able to do even more very shortly. So we're really excited about that opportunity.
Well, I appreciate all those ideas, and I think we can take those around the country. So I'm glad this is recorded. Yeah, Ed, I don't know if you want to jump in with any last minute questions.
Can I just add one thing our state of Washington did that so from the municipal to the state, and this was at the really with the work of the Nehemiah Project in Seattle, which is a consortium of congregations in our traditionally African American community of the Central District. And they were able to sponsor and help pass legislation that creates the ability to build greater density on land owned by faith-based communities. And then each municipality had to figure out their codes for that. And so then we worked with and supported that in a variety of ways, including when the city of Seattle wanted to decrease the affordability that only those in 30 to 60% of affordability AMI range would be able to get these exemptions. We worked with our friends to make sure that 80% workforce housing was also included, because that was critical for a lot of the churches that are doing this development. So you can you can work and work on the legislature, both your city, but also your state government, to get extra density. And so we've got extra height and greater density available to us.
That's wonderful. We could talk all day, but there's going to be other panels that will talk all day on the other things that you all have learned. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask kind of a lightning round question for everybody. 1 minute, maybe 45 seconds based on our time. What is the one lesson you learned that you would share? Susan?
I'm going to take it back to the core of this is the faith-based development initiative, and I would say prayer and perseverance. And if what you're doing isn't grounded in your faith and grounded in prayer, you're going to struggle. And so the ways we work together as faith communities, even when we work with our non-church folks, we trust that our prayer and our faith are guiding us. And so for me, it was trust, faith, and perseverance.
Well, thank you. Ken and Britt?
I will say the same thing. The first thing we did was form a prayer team, and that has been really important to this. And also to see this in a very positive way as an opportunity to share the good news. in every conversation we have with potential developers, with our neighborhoods, we are sharing what we value about building beloved community that is welcoming and diverse, with service and worship at its heart. And we're sharing about our mission, and we're sharing the good news that God really loves everyone and wants everyone to have housing and community and a place to be themselves and to be welcome. And so I think this is one of the primary attractions we have to people exploring a faith community. And so I would say be open about who you are. Pray. Don't be afraid to share your vision.
Thank you. Reverend Smothers?
Yes, I echo what my fellow panelists have said. And I would also add clarity of vision, and you have to keep casting the vision, because even though you see it, other folks will not maybe see it as clear as you do. So just keep on casting the vision and cast it as clearly as possible. And don't let anybody tell you that what God has told you can't be done, because a lot of people tell me it can't be done, and it's getting done. So attempt something so big that without God, it's bound to fail.
Thank you. And Jorge, we've got 30 seconds left from the Office of the Mayor.
Well, I really appreciated the framework that Patrick Jordan talked about earlier: vision, tenacity, and teamwork. I think those are fundamental ingredients to make these deals happen. And what you're seeing, at least in Miami-Dade County, is a local government really willing to incubate and accelerate those types of partnerships.
Thank you. Tori, back to you.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. We're so excited to have your participation today and your insights to kick off the panels this afternoon. Thank you, Ed, for co-moderating this discussion. So we're going to take a short break before our next panel. I look forward to seeing you all back here in about 5 minutes. I will be introducing the panel, which is called Who is Building Wealth Through Development? Opportunities for Partnership, Ownership, and Negotiation. So see you soon. Everybody just hang tight and be right back. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I am happy to introduce the next panel, Who is Building Wealth Through Development? Opportunities for Partnership, Ownership, and Negotiation. We are joined by an esteemed group who will be part of this discussion, including Kirk Goodrich, President at Monadnock Development, Priscilla Howard, President of the Community Solutions Group, Lloyd Jordan, Executive Partner at Motley Waller, Ulrich Lynch, Senior Managing Director of LDG Consulting, and Martin Trimble, Co-Director of Metro IAF. This discussion will be moderated by Reverend James Clark, Managing Director of Mission Real Estate Development at Trinity Church Wall Street in New York. Reverend Clark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tori. It's good to see everyone and great to be part of such an exciting and relevant discussion around the country, if not around the world. Trinity Church Wall Street is very happy to be a supporter of Enterprise and its faith-based development initiative, and I am extremely honored to be able to facilitate a panel of such distinguished professionals. I would give this panel a short name, Show Me the Money. Seems to be ultimately what we're supposed to respond to, and so we'll try to respond to that. We have a dynamic panel, but only 45 minutes. So our goal is really to hit the high notes, high points, and identify some key questions for further consideration. While this panel has a very transactional focus, there are some important considerations that the panel would like to share, just kind of setting a stage for our discussion. And so I'd just like to run through those regarding just the faith-based property development in general. And some of this you've already heard in the first panel, which was outstanding. First is the importance of a mission mindset. I think it was Reverend Jasmine in the prior panel that said highest and best mission. I like that rather than highest and best. And that's something that we all focus on and identify with. Secondly is knowing the value of what you bring, both in terms of the development rights, but also the relationships, the institutional knowledge, and the ties that a parish has to its community. The third thing is realizing the differences that exist by state and municipality. So everything we discuss in this panel may not be directly applicable in different contexts. And so it's important to be aware of that. And then the fourth thing is understanding and appreciating the difference between income and wealth. Some of the things we talk about may generate income, but they may not really generate long-term wealth. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And those can be identified and obtained through the transaction, through the real estate itself, as well as through the operation of the project that is ultimately developed. So there'll be just some discussion about that. And then finally, the importance of building faith-based organizations as financially sound social and cultural institutions, as really being critical in addressing the wealth disparity that exists in our country. And then we also hope that you'll take away the value of having a trusted advisor, which many on this panel are, in approaching the real estate development process. So with that, and no further ado, I'd like to launch right into our discussions. It's going to be kind of like a fireside chat. We're going to ask some of the panelists to kind of kick us off with responses and invite the others to jump in as you would like to. So the first question is about the players. Who are the key participants and what should they bring to a transaction? And there are two perspectives that we'd like to start with. One, we're going to ask Ulrich to start and share his perspective as an owner rep, how an owner rep would look at that question and answer, and then ask Kirk if he wouldn't mind leading off after Ulrich to discussing the developer perspective. So gentlemen, take it away.
Sure, great, thank you. As an owner's rep, we're helping churches in our role to understand the landscape that they're in. And so one of the things that we like to say is that you need to have patience, persistence, perspective and understanding. And for people who may perform the owner's rep role with non-faith-based organizations, it's a totally different thing. Working with faith-based organizations, the patience is understanding the environment that the church has to work within, both denominationally, regionally, etc. Persistence is going to take a while, but you need to kind of struggle along with the team that you are working with. And the perspective is understanding that particular faith-based organization's goals and where they are. Some are in locations where their land is very valuable and they may have a nest egg. Others, like we heard in the previous panel, are really at their times running out and they're trying to find a solution. So understanding the perspective that they're coming from. And then at the end of the day, helping them understand the environment that they're in and providing good counsel.
So if I could, one of the question was generally about the players. And so there's a host of players in regards to doing the transaction. First, you have the faith-based entity or the church itself, and needs to understand that it is a player in this role and not sitting back thinking that it's just a stepchild. The developer, various banks, whoever the bond issuer is, the credit buyer or syndicate, if there's one involved in the process, which normally there is, the contractor, the attorneys. Yes, let's not forget the attorneys. Plenty of attorneys, the financial analysts, even the appraisers, and then government plays a huge role overall. And so then it depends when we talk about banks, who's going to maybe do the construction loan versus the senior debt, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of players, and that's why it's good that you have someone that can quarterback that for you.
Yeah. And Lloyd, I would just add to that one last, of all the players you mentioned, one that I find is lacking a lot of times is a financial CPA accountant that works on behalf of the church that understands these deals, which this is not your everyday accounting endeavors. So,
Right. Kirk, you want to jump in on that?
Sure, Reverend Clark. So I agree with Ulrich and Lloyd on everything they said. Some may think as a developer that the idea is to find some church or faith-based institution that is not sophisticated and to try to, create a deal where you do well as a developer and they don't. And honestly, there are developers who take that approach. But our approach here and my approach has been the opposite of that. Whenever I encounter a faith-based institution or church that has land or some other asset, the first thing I do is I have to make a decision. Either I'm going to be the trusted advisor, and if that's the case, I'm going to remove myself from the potential role as developer. Or if I'm going to play the role of developer and potentially partner with them, then I have to make sure that there's somebody on their side who can be a trusted advisor. Because from my perspective, there has to be someone representing the faith-based institution or church that has the ability to understand all aspects of the and to be able to sit across the table and negotiate. And I think that's, Ulrich, that was your point, that an owner's rep in the rest of the development world is a very limited role, but in the context of working with faith-based institutions, that role is more expansive and requires that, the person or company playing it is willing to do far more than you would normally see. And so I think that's the most important thing. And then fundamentally, I see this as a triage activity, just like somebody comes into a hospital emergency room and there's an assessment. Somebody needs to be doing triage on church properties and assets and understanding what the church goals are, understanding what's possible, and then creating a path forward.
And if I can add just one small thing, and I agree with you, Kurt, one small thing, but it's huge in the whole spectrum of all these players. Whoever, you need a strong faith-based leader within that congregation, because you're going to have a lot of different opinions about what the church should look like, what the deal should be, and then how to use the money, how do we spend it. And a lot of developers don't like to interact with that, because even making decisions in congregations or churches can be difficult. So you're going to need that key person in the congregation itself who is designated the leader that everybody has confidence in and will follow, whether it's the pastor or someone else.
Right. So let's just drill down a little bit on this for a second, because we'll get to like how people make money in a minute. But let's just focus on, we talk about who the players are, but let's just drill down a little bit to what should they be bringing to the deal. So let's talk about the developer versus the owner rep versus the contractor. What do they bring to the transaction that they will ultimately get paid for? But let's talk about what they should be bringing.
So I could speak for the developer. I mean, I think the developers, the expectation, and this is actually, Reverend Clark, a really important thing, because, if you want to cut somebody's hair in New York City, you need a barber certificate. In most places, if you want to, if you want to sell real estate, you need some sort of license. The problem with development is it's an expansive, critically important function, but there's no certification. So anybody could pop up and tell you they're a developer, but if I wanted to cut here, I would need a little certificate. So it's a fascinating dynamic that a function as critical as that, there's no way for a church to independently certify or confirm that somebody can do what they tell you. So that's the first problem. But I think fundamentally you want somebody with a track record, because if you are in a situation where you got one shot, most institutions and faith-based organizations and churches have one piece of property. That's your single shot to get it right. I think you want to make sure you're working with somebody who's done it before. I have a friend who's an actor, most of you would know, and we laugh because he compares the world of people who say they're actors and filmmakers to the development world. Now, there's a ton of people who say they are filmmakers, and you say, well, or acting, you say, well, what have I seen you in, and what have you made? And they can't tell you. If you're out there and there's a developer you're working with and you can't see or touch what he or she has done, you need to keep looking. So I want to make this as easy as possible. The commercial, even a caveman can figure it out. Like, you need to understand that somebody has done already what they're telling you they're going to do for you. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
And not
rather
as a
than
broker.
going into sort of pro formas and everything else.
Yeah, and not as a broker. There's a lot of folks running around calling themselves developers, and what they are brokers, and they don't have, as my grandmother used to say, a pot to piss in. And you want to see their financial statement and see if they've actually done deals, as Curtis said. That is absolutely
great. And the owner rep, I know you talked a little bit about that already.
Yeah, so in most situations, I think the way we've kind of teed this up, in most situations, the owner's rep is representing the church and looking out for their interests. So we're helping to describe the landscape that you're in. We're evaluating the proposals. We're providing feedback. For example, in this state, you can do low-income housing tax credits, but you only have federal tax credits, not state tax credits. So that's a huge difference in the amount of equity that can come into that particular deal. Your owner's rep should know that. So when the proposals come in, they should be able to flag this and say, I don't know, this guy didn't do his homework because he's thinking that we can get state tax credits and we can't in this particular state, things of that nature. And then also helping make sure that, I know we're going to talk about the dollars later, but They should be there helping to describe to you, this is what they propose, but this is what you should be able to get, right? And so understanding those dynamics and looking out for the best interests of the church is what the owner's rep should be doing across the board.
Right. And then finally, the contractor, which sometimes gets confused with the developer. So just to make that distinction.
I'll just say that the contractor is usually hired by the developer, and sometimes the church is inside the development entity. So sometimes the church, if we're speaking to the church bodies and faith-based organizations on this call, you should, if you're in the developer entity, you should be having a say on who the contractor is. Right. But they are the ones who are physically paid a fee to construct the physical buildings and the improvements.
But and the thing to watch out for you, and really, well, Aldrich really comes in is the developer who also has a construction arm.
There you go.
Right. And wants to be the construction manager on the project also, and those lines get blurred, and it's who's watching who, and so you really need a strong owner's rep or somebody else. But yeah, that's
right. Great. So as our audience can see, there are a lot of players in the game, and it's key to know who they are and what they're supposed to bring. And having a solid owner rep is just vital to being able to navigate that successfully. So let's move into our next theme, which is questions that should be asked. And there's sort of two dimensions. There's what questions should the faith-based organization be asking of itself? And then there's what questions should be asked of what we call the counterparties, which is all the other folks in the transaction. So Priscilla, would you kind of lead us off in responding to that? And then maybe Martin and Lloyd jump in on the counterparty question?
Yes, I would be happy to. And I am happy to be here today as well. It is very, very important that before you get involved in any development that you do a self-assessment. And I have, and I'm going to run through them very quickly because I know that we have a short amount of time, but there are 6 self-assessments you should do. And what I like to tell people very clearly is that an old adage that used to say is you need to get your house in order first before you try providing housing for anyone else, if affordable housing is your mission. But there are 6 assessments, and I'm just going to go down, tell you a little bit about those, and then if you have questions, maybe we might have some time at the end, I'm not sure. But before you even start your assessment, the one thing that I would ask you to do is to ask yourself why. Why are you interested in the development? And the reason you would ask that is because we all have various reasons. Some very quickly could just be that you need additional financial resources to continue to do what you've already been doing in the community, whether that's feeding the homeless, having a clothes closet, a food pantry. The other could be because you actually see a new vision for yourself, that you want to be at the table providing development, community development, affordable housing, because you see that as a valuable infrastructure for your community, as well as for the people of your congregation. So once you answer those, then you do the 6 assessments. And the first one is organizational structure. You need to look and see how you're already organized. And do you have a nonprofit? Some faith-based organizations are moving forward and they don't yet have a nonprofit. So whether you have a nonprofit or you don't, do you need to have an attorney or someone involved to review the documents, if you have one, to make sure this is an activity you can do without putting at risk what you currently have in place? And if you don't have one, you need to start right away putting one together. And an attorney could really assist you in doing that to make sure that whatever you develop does not hurt the structure that you already have in place. So make sure that you do that. The other organizational structure things you should look at is your internal infrastructure. Do you already have things in place, whether that's technology, whether you have accounting, people who know how to keep files? Because this development process is long-term. It's more than just sitting at the table, closing the deal and getting the dollars that you hope that could be
long-term financial benefit for your organization. But this involves also on the back end being in compliance, making sure you're not doing anything that's against the financing sources that you have. So make sure you're looking at that. The second one I would say is understand your governance. And they talked about that a little bit on the first panel. You need to understand how decisions are made within your faith-based organization. Do you have to have the entire congregation vote on a decision? Do you have to go to your trustee board, your deacon board, whatever organization you have? And if some faith-based ministries have to go to a bigger district and ask the question. So be clear on the governance, on how that's done, and on the timing that takes, because once you're involved in a development, there's some although it's a long process, but there are some key things that are involved that are time sensitive. So if you know it takes 6 months or 3 months for you to get an answer, you need to clear all of that up front. So understand your governance. The third thing I would say that if you have a board of director, we can combine the board of director, and the number 4 is the staff. If you have any staff, you need to understand the capacity of both. What expertise do you already have? I think we mentioned earlier, it's very good if you have someone in your congregation that knows a little bit about development or organization in this way. So understand who you have on either on your staff, in your congregation, or on your board. The other reason you need to understand your board is when we get into financing, some financing dictate what your board looks like. So you might have to go in and make some changes to your board or add to your board. So make sure you assess that, your staff. As far as staffing is concerned, make sure if you have staffing, because sometimes you might choose not to partner. So to those nonprofits or faith-based organizations who decide we're going to do this on our own, then you need to look at the capacity of who you have. Are they trained? Do they have the expertise to get this done? And also look to see if even if you partner, if you're willing to get your staff trained so that you can at least have some basic knowledge. The fifth one would be financial capacity. What is your financial capacity to do this if you're going to do it on your own or with a partner? And when I talk about financial capacity, it's not just cash. Do you have the ability to make guarantees? A lot of nonprofits, faith-based organizations cannot make those guarantees. And also, do you have something else that's of value that you're bringing to the transaction? And that could be land, an existing building. I think someone talked about earlier that they had a school that was no longer being used as a school, so they brought that into the transaction. So make sure you need to assess those things that you're doing. And I think Lord is shaking his head. I don't know if he's shaking it in disagreement with, but he will have an opportunity to dispute anything that I'm telling you or to add to it. The other thing that once you've done those 5 assessments, I would then say that's when you should start thinking about asking yourself the question on if we should partner or if we shouldn't. I have worked with a lot of nonprofits, faith-based organizations that have said, oh, we don't want to partner. We want to do it. And they really should have a partner. So you need to be honest with yourself when you're doing your self-assessment and determine whether or not you should partner. And once you do that, I will tell you, it's just very important, and we'll talk about partnerships later and all of that, but it's very important that you do your homework on who you decide to partner and all of that. And the one thing that I will tell you, while you're doing your self-assessments, always keep your mission, your underlying mission in the forefront of your mind, because whatever you decide to do, it should not change your mission unless you choose that you want your mission to be expanded or revised or something, but it should not. Do not let your partner dictate that because we have to do it this way, then your mission change. So those are the 6 assessment items I will add to this discussion.
Great. Thank you, Priscilla. I mean, just critical self-assessment stuff before we jump into everything else. Very helpful to understand and appreciate. Martin, can you cover the counterparties and what are the questions once a faith-based group has kind of gone through this self-assessment? What are the questions they should be thinking about and prepared to ask the various counterparties in the real estate transaction?
Hey, so I come at this as a community organizer, and I'll build on what Kirk said. The first is track record, working with religious institutions. As President Reagan used to say about the Russians, trust but verify. So get a phone list and have your own conversations with other religious institutions that the developers work with. Get an address list and visit their properties at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. Talk to residents about the quality of the building and the services provided. And then lastly, what's the track record in the jurisdiction that you're proposing to do the project? Because all development is local. And then the other set of questions I would lift up is around mission alignment. And maybe some indicators of that are what percentage of local hires do they have on all of the projects they've done? Long-term affordability. Is this a developer or that you may be a co-owner with that is interested in flipping this property after the compliance period has expired? What community benefits beyond the project are they willing to or have they provided previously? And then are they open to leveraging the development? We had an institution that had a 12-acre site where they wanted to do a senior building, but two sides of that 12-acre site was surrounded by I think about 40 abandoned blighted row homes that the organization wanted to see if they could leverage their development to redevelop into home ownership. And the developer had no interest. They were interested in, the rental tax credit fee project that they could get in and out of. So those are just my thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Martin. So we talked about who the players are, what they bring to the table, hopefully, what the questions are to ask of the faith-based organization and of the players and the counterparties. Now let's get to the show me the money question. How do these folks make money? What risks are they taking that they're being compensated for? And I'll add the third piece, which is where have you seen in your experience the faith-based organization participate in that? So Ulrich, why don't you lead us off and then we'll invite everyone to jump in on that one.
Sure. So let's start off with the faith-based organizations. They typically are bringing land to a deal. Maybe it's land with some old buildings that, may be torn down, but that's an asset, right? So they should be compensated for putting that asset inside the deal. It can take, various avenues. It could be a for sale situation. It could be a long-term ground lease situation, a number of different ways. So they can get compensated by a sale, a ground lease, co-developer fees, and we can talk about that a little bit later. And I'm gonna reach out to Lloyd to kind of put the lawyer hat on there and make sure we keep everybody in the right lanes. As a partner in the deal, right? Partnership is a generic term, and so what comes with that is not only the proceeds, the money, but also some risk. So we need to talk about that. And so when I say proceeds, that could be cash flow during the coming from the operations, as well as if it's something like I think Martin just mentioned earlier, the developer wants to trade out after a particular time. If the faith-based organization is inside the deal, they should get a piece of that transaction on the back end as well. It all depends on how it's negotiated. So let's, we're going down the list. Next, let's just say developer. Developers should come in and, they're the ones who are putting their resources to bear. They're leveraging their guarantee. They have the expertise. So they're making both developer fees. Usually they're also going to be in an ownership structure, so they'll get cash flow as well. And then, of course, if there's a sale transaction on the back end, they'll also get transaction fees from that as well. And then I will make a distinction that there are some developers are fee developers where they get paid a fee and they're not part of the ownership. and some are developers that stay inside the deal, and they also are part of the ownership. And then we'll group the next two as owner's rep, which is what I've already described before. Typically, we're just getting consulting fees, not inside the ownership. And you know, all the deals I've been in is just a consulting fee. There may be some situations where some owners reps are inside the deal, but I think that's probably not the norm. And then lastly is just the service providers, the lawyers, the accountants, all of those, appraisers, surveyors, all of those folks who provide professional services. They also be just getting professional service fees, not inside the deal.
Great. Lloyd, what you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, Priscilla, I would just probably squirm because I have not yet come across a not-for-profit or a church group that had all those things. And I don't want to drive people off when they can get people like Aldridge and others to help bring all those things to the table. So that was just because I have not yet come across the entity that had all that from a not-for-profit or church standpoint. And I don't want them to drive them off because the value, they're sleeping on the value of their land, the building, and more importantly, something that's been missing, the goodwill of that church. That church has been in that community sometimes 100, 200 years, the goodwill of getting the deal done. But on the deal side, please underline, when it's time for a capital event or the end of the compliance period, the right of first refusal on what that looks like. There's now a lot of litigation coming, but it's all shaping to that the developers who used to didn't give the not-for-profit or the church the opportunity to do the right of first refusal, that there's a lot of cases coming about now saying they should have had it, and they should have had it at the bare minimum. And that's the capital event that allows the church come back and own everything and move everybody out, and how that happens. But the waterfall, pay attention to the waterfall. The waterfall is something that comes about at the end of the net income comes back. What happens with the money that's left over? Pay attention to that waterfall. Who's getting what in what order? And if the church is way down here, let's make sure if that's where it should be, because it take on an amount of risk. And then the amount of risk, a lot of times developers will say, well, I'm taking on the guarantees. And because I'm taking on the guarantees, I should be Big Daddy. Well, are you really putting up your balance sheet? Right. Or have you went out to a third party and bought this guarantee, and you're charging the development from it? So there's a lot of little instances like that, but I don't want to, folks, just not overcomplicate it. To the people who are listening, it's not an overcomplicated process if you get the right professionals to work with you, but you're sitting on your stewardship is not only of your flock, but the stewardship of that land. And some churches are falling apart on their own, and some churches are running out, how are we going to fix this? And you're sitting there with valuable assets. You're sitting on it every day.
Gonna ask.
Is Big Daddy a legal term? Legal term.
Because actually, I've said it sometimes. What do you think you are, Big Daddy? You wouldn't have this deal if it wasn't for our church, not land. And you know what? We have somebody else who is ready to replace you. So.
Reverend Clark, can I just add one thing is that I think this is why it's so important. And the one thing that I only work in Florida, so I know the Florida system as well as anybody. But the one thing that I tell people is we talked about asking the right question. So if you're going to have a trusted project manager or consultant, whoever is leading you, make sure that they understand the ins and out of all of the resources that you might be applying for. And the reason that's important is because I know in the state of Florida, we have one program that dictates the waterfall. So if you don't know that, your potential partner could say, oh, you're going to get the money like this. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the state of Florida has already said how the money will flow. So you need to make sure that your consultant really understands the financing that you're hoping to apply for.
Thank you, Priscilla. So let's talk a little bit about income versus wealth. And a lot of the professional service providers, they get a fee that's income. But unless you're getting a lot of fees over a long period of time, that's not wealth. Maybe Kirk, can you launch us, and then Martin talk about this wealth and how can faith-based organizations build wealth through the development transaction?
Right. Right. So when I always think about this as when I think about wealth, I think about it in three ways, Reverend Clark. I think about individuals building wealth, households, families. I think about Black businesses in particular building wealth. And I think about institutional wealth, which is what we're talking about here, that faith-based institutions, but not only faith-based institutions. I will always say, if you go to wealthy communities, you'll also find institutions, whether they be arts or cultural or religious institutions, also have wealth. And so I try not to disconnect the creation of wealth for individuals and businesses from institutional wealth. And I think that's really important. And with respect to institutional wealth, I think intentional decisions about what your goals are. I think most faith-based institutions have a single asset, and that asset is the where they worship often, and so from my perspective, the task should be certainly you need to create a stream of income to make sure you can supplement your operations, but in reality, the most important task is to create a nest egg, either through a capital event or through a very long-term stream of income that really constitutes a wealth-building event. And from my perspective, that in order to do that, you have to have people who've done it before who understand it. And I think a simple approach we often take with faith-based institutions is what Lloyd was talking about. So if you participate in a development endeavor, really thinking creatively about what happens with the disposition of the asset after a certain period of time. And then secondly, what is the long-term plan for a stream of income? With respect to stream of income, often you could achieve the same thing through a long-term lease of your property that you could with a development that you take risk on. And so I just think there needs to be folks in the room who understand that what the relative appetite for risk a faith-based institution has, and to be able to lay out alternatives. The thing I like about long-term leasing a property is that you retain ownership long-term and there's no financial risk, and you could actually lend against, you could borrow against a leasehold interest independent of what is being done, in terms of building a building. And so from my perspective, that's kind of a quick overview, but that's how I see it.
Great. Thanks. Martin, can you weigh in on that based on what you've seen with faith-based groups and creating wealth? Clearly, it takes a long-term perspective. It's not an overnight thing, unless you buy a $2 billion lottery ticket, maybe. But can you share some perspective on that?
Yeah, I would just say a really clear-eyed power analysis of what you bring to the table. And don't underestimate, as Lloyd said, the value of the land and also the political will and relationships, both in the neighborhood where the development's going to happen and also in the jurisdiction is where it's going to happen. It gives you a lot of leverage. My feeling is there always ought to be a 50-50 relationship. 50% of ownership and of developer fee. I'd like to add one thing to wealth that Kirk talked about. I think that there's actually a really important conversation that has to happen inside the religious institutions, which is how are you building community wealth? A lot of these developments are done in blighted neighborhoods, right, where it's very easy to do a transaction for a rental housing project. But we all know we're fighting a crisis of affordable housing in this country, and the suppression of wages. And so I think every religious institution that does a deal and gets money off of a deal ought to consider biblical tithe on that wealth to invest in organizing. And I'm not just calling for investment in the IAF, but into organizing that generates the kind of investment from the public sector and the private sector in affordable housing or around jobs. So just something to consider.
Great, thank you. So what is going too far? So I mean, because I think everyone listens to this and say, "Oh, I'm going to go big." What'd you call Lloyd? Big Daddy. I'm going to go and I'm gonna get everything I can get out of the deal. But there's a saying, and you may have heard in business: pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. So you got to know how much you can ask for. So maybe Lloyd or Martin or anyone on the panel, just share a little perspective of what's reasonable and what's probably not reasonable.
Well, one way of going about this, and I can't remember, I think maybe Kurt talked about it, or is to let people know that your property, that you're entertaining thoughts of developing your property. And so therefore you can open up and maybe even do a request for proposals to participate. So the market then will bear to you that which adds a value to your property. The other thing to know, if you can afford it, if the church can afford it, already have in its pocket an appraised value of what they think that the land is valued for as is, and potentially to be. But if you open it up to competition, the competition is going to drive the kind of the market value for you. And everybody thinks that their land, their church, their property is worth 100 times more than probably what it really is. So, to open yourselves up. One other thing I'm going to say, when you do open up and trying to market the property to attract developers to the property, do not, except to some extent, if you're strong on mission, you want to make sure when you go out, you let people know that you have a mission, that you really want to see some affordable housing on this property, and how you want it. But generally, where I've seen churches and other not-for-profits going out and say, we think this should be a retail, blah, 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 or it should be XYZ. And let the developers come to you with their vision about how to use the land. You can always reject it, but let them come, because sometimes, they are in that arena every day. And no one in your church or in the not-for-profit are in that arena. And even I have sometimes been surprised to the opportunities to a business deal that could be made based upon the developer recommending a certain use for that land, and it makes a bigger pot for the church to return. So the market is kind of driven by the offers you get and the possible use of the land, but try to open it up, and it'll bear itself.
Great, thanks. Well, we are just about out of time, but I do want to borrow a page from Ed Delaney and do the one thing takeaway question. So 30 seconds, just what's the takeaway that the audience should have on Show Me the Money from your perspective with faith-based organizations? Let's see, Priscilla, can you kick us off? 30 seconds.
Yes, the one thing that I will say is they need to investigate to see if they can get pre-development money from somewhere, so that they don't have to put out any of their dollars, or they can be reimbursed for the dollars that they put out up front. So that's the one thing I would add to the conversation.
Wonderful. Let's see, Kirk.
I would say, Reverend, that they need to have a trusted advisor, whoever that may be, someone who they can verify knows what they're talking about. And I think to the extent they're partnering with anybody, another nonprofit or a for-profit developer, that they really have to make sure that the person has demonstrated experience of the type that that they need. So
great. Ulrich.
Yep. I would just say there is no fast and hard rules. You notice Lloyd didn't give you any numbers. It's all about the various levers that your organization can pull, right? So it could be, you have a great relationship with the jurisdiction, and you can leverage that to bring public dollars to your project that the developer couldn't have gotten on their own. So it's all based upon that particular endeavor, that particular project. And, on some deals you're pulling more and others you're pulling out. So that's where I'll leave it at.
Great. Thanks. Martin.
I think I would echo what Kirk said. And don't hire people you can't fire.
Well said. Lloyd.
Yeah, so let me take it just a little bit different, but I think Martin just kind of hit it. And some people are going to find this as a shock. You need to find a developer partner that you can live with. One that's going to treat you respectfully as a partner, and that has even a greater value than maybe some of the dollar you might get from another developer that you cannot live with.
Amen.
Having a developer partner that that you're comfortable with, that respects you as an entity, is to me is paramount, greater than the return, within reason.
Yeah. Well said. We often say a sale is a transaction, a development is a marriage. And so that says a lot. Well, I want to say thank you. What a great panel. It's so good to get to know you, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to interact and work together. Our friends at Enterprise, thank you for this opportunity to share and just scratch the surface of all things real estate and all things mission real estate development. So we very much appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Clark and members of the panel, thank you all so much. Very much appreciate it. And we really do hope that folks are on all of these panels, right? We know it in some ways. There's so much information that could be shared, is being shared. We intentionally did not have kind of the chat and Q&A function active because there's just, we've got such great panelists and the time goes by quick. But what we're hoping is that people are making note of questions that you want to have answered, and that you'll, whether it's if you're in an enterprise market reaching out to us or wherever you are, reaching out to trusted professionals to say, hey, I heard this brought up by a lawyer or by a developer or by a pastor, right, or a lay leader at this conversation. Let's talk about this, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're hoping, and certainly so far we have gotten plenty of food for thought, that this is a serious undertaking. And we're hoping that certainly for folks in the faith community, we'll go into it right seriously and making sure you're getting prepared, but also for other players in the market. And I think Lloyd really hit on it, the counselor, about this notion of respect, right? These are relationships that we're talking about, and having relationships grounded in respect and accountability are really important. And so please know, for all of those in the audience, that you will be receiving, everyone who registered, and I want to say we're excited to say that nearly 600 people registered for this event, will be receiving an email next week that will have a link to a recording of today's proceedings. So as we transition and get ready to flow into our final panel, we are really pleased to have with us a speaker who is really coming to us from an organization that has supported us, and I'm just excited to have him here. Wells Fargo has provided game-changing support of the FBDI in the last 2 years by providing over $8 million to support multi-year cohorts in 6 cities. Their money has helped to leverage government support, almost another $2 million in government support just in Washington, D.C. alone. So we're pleased today to hear from Otis Raleigh. Otis is the head of philanthropy and community impact at Wells Fargo and the president of the Wells Fargo Foundation. He recently joined Wells Fargo from the Rockefeller Foundation, where he served as the head of U.S. Equity and Economic Opportunity Initiative. He's held leadership roles in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, spanning human services, transportation, urban planning, city government, and housing, including cabinet roles with 5 different mayors and currently serves on the boards of the Stonewall Community Foundation, Living Cities, and the Asset Funders Network. Of particular note, though, for our conversation today, if anyone went onto the interweb, as we like to call it, and you looked up and found it back in 1996, there was a Master of City Planning thesis paper done by one Mr. Otis Rowley Jr. that was titled "The Role of Faith-Based Institutions in Promoting and Sustaining Local Economies," a case study of Allen AME Church, Jamaica, Queens. So as the kids like to say that I work with, he ain't new to this. He's been around with this topic around faith-based development for a long time. So Otis, the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's really an honor to be a partner with Enterprise and what I believe is just really important work. Ultimately, when we at Wells Fargo think about what it is to do economic development and community development through our foundation, we focus in and on housing, access and affordability, financial health, small business and entrepreneurship, and climate resilience and sustainability. And when I think about the perfect partner to do that work, there are a few others beyond that really that's kind of the top of the list is Enterprise. So when we kind of together think about this work, we recognize that there are many untapped resources within our community. Our pastor that I know and love used to often say, you know, what you need is already in the church in terms of some of the resources to get things done, to survive as a community. And we believe that to be very much true as it relates to faith-based institutions' ability to be part of the solution in transforming communities in a real and substantive way. Many people already who are participating today know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. That, you know, some of the largest landowners in rural and municipal areas and cities, you know, our churches, our faith-based institutions. And so how do you really help them to get equipped? How do you help to build up their capacity to understand development? They are masterful at human development and knowing those things, those tools that are necessary for the development of individuals and families. But I think that they also could be as masterful in helping to revitalize not just the people within the communities, but also the physical plants and the physical environment in a very real and substantive way. And that's why we're excited about this partnership. We know that the faith-based development initiative has the potential of really helping to equip many of our faith-based leaders and their congregations, many of the lay leaders as well, and helping to do those things that are necessary to maximize the resource, the economic resource, the community development resource present in that land. And so any way that we can be partners, we want to continue to be so. I'm excited about the funding that we're bringing to bear, but I'm also excited about the human resources, some of the talent here at the foundation, and the talent that we have through our partnership with Enterprise to really, really try to address this in a serious and substantial way. And I'm particularly excited about the fact that we were able to kind of kick this off in the town that I live in currently in Baltimore, Maryland. There are just so many faith-based institutions there that are keen and ready to really take this from where we are to where we can and should be. So I just wanted to be afforded the opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for your commitment, not just to your congregations, but to your community. Thank you for your willingness to stretch and to learn from each other. You know, iron sharpens iron, right? And I think that there is a great opportunity here for us to leverage the faith-based institutions' resources towards the broader and wider good beyond just the kind of the spiritual, emotional, and the kind of human supportive services that churches are known for. I want, 5-10 years from now for people to be thinking about how faith-based institutions transform the landscape. You know, how they built more housing than ever before, how they established more credit unions and CDFIs, community development financial institutions, than ever before. That they were meeting people where their heads and hearts were, but also helping them to build up their pocketbooks and wallets in a real way, so that we can address really building up generational wealth. Wells Fargo is committed to that. The foundation's excited about it, and we couldn't be happier than to be partners with Enterprise in this initiative. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a couple of words with you, and to be able, almost 30 years later, took a little while, but to put millions and millions of dollars behind some of the thoughts that were in that master's thesis that was mentioned earlier. So thank you.
Otis, thank you so much. And it's interesting to see how God can order our steps from the thesis work you were doing then to be at a place and having this conversation. People have heard me say before that the pastor who raised me in ministry, where a lot of the ideas that are being manifested today, is someone that I met when I was 7 years old, who is now also leading up the collective empowerment group's FBDI related work in South Florida today. So no accidents taking place here. So thank you. Thanks for your support. Thanks for the support from Wells Fargo. And we look forward to the continued collaboration. So our final panel, we are fortunate at Enterprise. We are blessed to have some great people. You heard from Tori earlier today and Christy. Reverend Joe Williams is a senior program director who leads up our FBDI work in our Mid-Atlantic region. He will moderate our final panel here today. You see our panelists who are listed. And Joe, I think you all are going, as we say in the church, bring us on home. So we'll turn it over to you, Reverend Williams, to introduce our panel and lead us into.
Thank you very much, Reverend Biles, and we appreciate the opportunity. We're excited to actually bring up the rear today. I think that we've had an exciting day in the work and the information that has been shared. What we want to do as a goal in this panel is to really demonstrate why this cohort model has an effectiveness, and even how we can build upon the effectiveness. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call on our panelists. I ask them to give a brief introduction of themselves and who they are, and then we'll roll right into the questions. So let me start with fortunately, we have two pastors on the panel and two development consultants, development individuals who have been working with houses of worship. Let me start with our two pastors, and Reverend Gould, you're to my left. Let me start with you. Let us in on why this cohort effort has been beneficial to you and how the participation has helped you in your house of worship.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Pastor Darrell Gould of Gillis Memorial Christian Community Church. I'm the third pastor of the historic Gillis Memorial. I'm also the president of the Park Heights Faith-Based Community Development Corporation. This has helped me a great deal being a part of the cohort. There are so many aspects that has been a blessing and informative for me, such as the Shark Tank presentation and so many others. And again, I was blessed to be able to be a part of it.
Thank you very much. Vonette, let me switch over to you and introduce yourself, but answer this question as you do so. As a consultant / owner's rep, what is the most significant challenge that you find in working with the house of worship?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vonette Harris with Kairos Development. I think the most challenge in working with faith-based organizations is getting them to understand the amount of time and dedication it's going to require to do a real estate transaction. Oftentimes, the pastor is the one at the helm and making all of the decisions, and they're doing pastoral care. And so they may not have the time to really focus on it. And so getting them to understand that maybe the pastor may not be the best fit, and to really get the church to do an assessment of the talent that's in their house. And when I speak about talent and gifts, I'm not talking about as it relates to worship service, but just as it relates to a real estate transaction. There may be members in their congregations in their back pews that understand construction or understand finance or understand architectural work or things of that nature. And so getting to understand that it takes a lot of time and dedication to be devoted to this transaction, I think is the most challenging.
Thank you very much. You know, up in New York, my brother, I know that you all have some experiences that have taken place as you've worked with houses of worship. And, you know, we talked about this prior to when we met earlier before coming together with the panel. But the same question that Vonette was posed to, won't you share from your perspective why and what's been the challenge in that regard?
That's for me.
Yes, for you.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shegun Passenger. I'm with Deverny and Brooks, and we are development consultants and developers based in New York. And I essentially agree with Vonette. I think part of a big challenge is having the church, the FBO, focus on the transaction, because it is not it's not the first responsibility of anyone in the church. Even if you have people with experience and capacity and knowledge of real estate development within the church, they have day jobs and they have full-time worries. So to have someone who is a dedicated point of contact and who can project manage the process is a huge challenge, because everyone in the church or everyone in the FBO is doing something else. So getting a concerted effort, attention over a very long period of time, the period of time of many years that it takes from inception to completion of a project is a tremendous challenge.
You know, I would like to, Pastor Riola, and I want to go back to that question that we asked Dr. Gould. And from your perspective, what has been the benefit of participating in the cohort as you have working your way through this process? Dr. Riola?
Sure. Thank you, Reverend Williams. Again, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well,
something happened. Yeah. So let's switch gears for a second while he works his way back in. You know, there will be technical difficulties in this, and when we're trying to do things virtually, so we all understand that. Let me ask this question. Seguin, I want to not mispronounce your name. I want to know, is there a difference in working with a house of worship in terms of the development process versus working with someone who's not an FBO or is not a faith-based organization?
Yeah, I think the primary difference is that most of the other clients and people involved in the industry are involved in the industry, so they know they know, especially affordable housing, they know the acronyms, they know the lay of the land, they know how it works. But when you're dealing with an FBO, there is some sort of bringing to a basic level of understanding of affordable housing, which even if you're dealing with market rate real estate, that's a pretty different industry from affordable housing, you know. So there, most of the time we're dealing with people who are familiar with the industry, and you know, they know what LITC means, they know all the acronyms, and so with FBOs, you have to be mindful of the fact that of the language you use and the terminology, and also be mindful of the difference in mindset. I've heard talk of matters like legacy with FBOs, which is typically not a word I hear when I'm dealing with other people in the affordable housing industry. So there's a very significant difference in perspective, and the difference in knowledge base and in orientation that you have to address and be mindful of.
One of the driving points of the Faith-Based Development Initiative, FBDI, as we call it here in Enterprise, is the fact that in our cohort model and the work that we do with houses of worship, there are significant components. And Dr. Gould, because you've been through this, there's the catalytic funding, there's the technical assistance, there's the training development, there's pairing you with a development consultant, the peer-to-peer sharing, roundtable meetings, Shark Tank sessions. All those things are part of, as we work with you over a period of time, 2 years, 1 year. Of those components that I've mentioned, and even when you look at and how the last question was answered, what do you see as the most significant ones to you of the ones that I've shared?
Well, as you named them all of them are critical to our learning curve. But if I had to pick 4, it would definitely be the Shark Tank presentation, the consultant owners representative relationship, very, very helpful, the training development and peer-to-peer sharing.
Talk about that Shark Tank presentation. Kind of describe that for our audience who may not know, and for those who don't know, that's something that the Mid-Atlantic market has been doing over these last 8 years or so. But talk about that and what that really is.
Well, it's really kind of just like the television show, where they bring their idea to those who can help fund their project. With this, we brought our entire project from start to finish, along with our civil engineer, development consultant, construction, our whole plan, our architects, and we explained everything to a group of people who listened to us and challenged us on where we were lacking and applauded us where we was on the right track.
Vonette, you saw that last year as well. From your perspective as a development consultant, how beneficial did you see that process to be? And for our audience, in some cases, we will have a finance person, the director of the local municipality housing department. We will have possibly a developer and another industry professional who sits on this panel. Vonette?
I think it made it realistic, because the reality is that if you were, regardless of your faith-based organization or just a community-based organization or a private developer, you have to be able to convey and express your vision to a group of audience, to funders, to other lenders, to grant foundations and things. And you have to be able to sell yourself and sell your product. And so this was an opportunity for folks to be able to think very concisely about their project and be able to highlight what was important to them and what was the overall goal. So it was their 5-minute elevator pitch. And so if you're unable to do that, you're not going to be able to get access to those resources. So it was a very important tool, I think, in preparing them for their next step after they've participated in the cohort.
What's always funny about that, and for those who may participate in future cohorts or in cohorts now, and you haven't gotten to that, what's always funny is that when we tell the pastors you have 7 minutes. Now, when you tell a preacher you got 7 minutes to say something, that means that we don't need you to start out the runway and then work your way up. You got to get right to that performer and get right to the meat of the presentation to make sure that you are getting the information out that is necessary to be evaluated. Because we've had some who bombed out in that process, and it's not a good feeling, but it's a necessary feeling. It reminds me of what an old professor of mine said in college. He said that our job is to allow you to fail inside these walls so you won't fail outside those walls. Because as it was mentioned, the development process can be gangster. And what our job is in the cohort is to help you to become gangster. So let me shift for a moment, and I hope we get Brother Riolan back in here. But let me ask this question. From Pastor Gould, from the perspective of being a faith leader, what was the experience like for you? And I want you to think about the initial part of the experience as well, when you were working with a development consultant. And did that prepare you? And you can talk about your project a little bit as well. Did that prepare you when you got ready to put together your joint venture agreement?
Absolutely. It was very helpful because you don't know what you don't know until you find out what you don't know. and they help you to understand what you need to know. And it really helped us. It really grounded us. It made us grind because we saw that we had a lot more work to do after meeting with our consultant. And our project, it's a $24 million project, a Gillis Grand Family Apartments, which will have 78 units, 2 and 3 bedrooms with a retail and a medical facility on the first floor. And we are looking to break ground, or completion rather, in 2024. We've partnered with Homes for America, and Gillis and Homes for America are co-developers. We have, yeah.
That's great to hear. Hey, Vonnie, let me ask this question, because you've worked on both sides. You worked with houses of worship that have not been in this cohort model, right? And you worked with houses of worship that are part of the cohort model. What is the difference between the two?
The biggest thing is understanding the language and the learning curve. Usually churches who have not participated in and they have not ventured in doing any type of real estate transactions, this is foreign language to them. And so they are really novice in the dealings. And so my approach in dealing with them is very different with respect to, meeting them where they are, knowing that you got to start at ground zero. Working with the church that has actually went through the cohort and understood, I didn't have to do as much explaining. They were asking more detailed questions about the transaction and what were the next steps to bring their project to fruition. Looking at funding and things of that nature. So that was what I saw was the biggest difference. If you haven't participated, like the gentleman said, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting that learning curve, getting them over that initial learning curve is the most challenge.
Dr. Riolan, glad to see you back, sir. I want to flip that question to you. The benefit of being in the cohort and working with a development consultant, how did the cohort make you comfortable in terms of that process in itself?
Well, thank you, Reverend Williams. Not to restate, but quite honestly, just the opportunity to be conversive. Having gone through the cohort, understanding some of the vernacular, understanding process, understanding workflow, and then being able to sit down with the development consultant and have an intelligible conversation. Certainly, they are still the expert, but to not come to the conversation completely unprepared and inept certainly gave us a position of feeling good about the process, and it also helped with our development consultant, who is phenomenal, just that we can speak similar languages at least.
Yeah, I think that's important. And Segwin, as you look forward to the work that you're going to be doing in New York and working with houses of worship and understanding that enterprise is building up the knowledge base of these individuals that will participate. From your perspective, does that help to maybe adjust your approach in a sense, or does it give you does it make you think that you have the opportunity for easier pathway forward? Not that development is easy, so we certainly understand that, because it's not. Every development process and every development aspect is unique in its own self. but knowing that Enterprise is walking alongside these houses of worship in this effort, does that help you in your approach?
Yes, I would say definitely it does help. And there's a suite of resources and tools and training, and has been mentioned as sort of bringing up training to understand the process of affordable housing and real estate that happens in a fairly structured format that you have with the FBDI program that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I think those resources are truly priceless. I don't know why an FBO would not take advantage of them, especially given that they are at no cost, they're free. There's absolutely nothing to lose in participating, and there's a great deal to gain. So yes, it definitely improves the perspective, it improves your ability to assist the FBOs, having this structured program and having all these resources available.
Let me shift for a minute. We got maybe about 17 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we kind of hit something that's I think is kind of challenging. We understand, and we've heard today that that houses of worship have the land to build, and there's an opportunity here to be an answer to the dilemma and the challenges in any municipality across this country that is looking to address affordable housing, maybe having a community impact structure that meets the needs in the community. But what are some of the hindrances that you think are there that will keep a house of worship from not wanting to take advantage of such an opportunity? Let me give each of you a chance to answer that question. Vonette, I'll start with you.
I think the primary hindrance is there's a lack of understanding. Knowledge is power. And I think here's an opportunity to participate, learn a new industry, and learn from the industry experts of people who are doing this work or have done this work and have done it successfully, and doing it, within a family. As you said, it's okay to fail inside the house. So when you go outside the house, you're not going to fail. And so I think that's probably the biggest hindrance, that, the fear of the unknown, and also identifying the individuals who can dedicate the time to devote to it. I tell everybody, doing a real estate transaction is like having a baby. And so you have to give it love, nurture, and attention. It doesn't just come out and it's done. You have to take time. Infancy that's exactly what it is when you start with your initial concept. That's
many of us are struggling right now with trying to understand that analogy, but we get it. Many of us on the screen are looking at you like, yeah, you would know.
You're raising a child in this process. So, you have to give it the time and attention and nurture if you want it to be successful. So, you have to devote that. And it can't be something that you do in your spare time. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I just encourage anyone, certainly pray about it and ask the Lord for guidance. And then, certainly recognize, timing is everything. I named my company Kairos Development for a reason. It's all about God's timing. And so the landscape is there. There are resources that weren't there previously that can help you on this journey. So you should take advantage of it.
All right, let me stay up in the Baltimore area. Dr. Gould.
Yes, I would agree. And I would say that you have to have a passion to want to meet the needs of the people. And if you do it for any other reason other than like we are trying to stabilize a community and help those in the Park Heights area, if you try to do it out of gain or benefit for any other reason, it's not going to work, because it's hard. It's really hard. And you have to learn so much. You have so many hills to climb and hurdles to lead, that if you're not doing it for the right reason, the reason, the God-given reason that he gave you, then you're going to quit. You're going to want to quit. There has been times when you want to throw in the towel, but you remember the passion in which you need to help the people in your community, the people of God. And that is what pushes us. That's what pushes us rather, and continue to have that tenacity to see the project through.
Yeah. A segment in New York, I understand from my colleague Tori, and we've even had Dr. Riolas talk to a pastor up in New York to share with the experience. As you all are pulling this cohort together and getting people there, are you finding that people are reluctant? They have more questions about this opportunity?
Yes, I think trust is a big issue. I think in New York and other places, a lot of FBOs have had bad experiences with people, so-called developers, either approaching them and they realizing that they're not of good faith, that they are trying to pull one over. And I think there's some level of reluctance, especially when you tell them, yes, this is all for free. And so there's a bit of like a question of, really, what's in this for you?
Right.
And especially coming from the experience they've had previously, there's a lot of that in New York of, a lot of people have bad taste in their mouth from previous deals that went south. And so I think that's something they have to overcome. And I think part of the explanation for getting there is that this program and enterprise is mission aligned with FBOs. And I think also having the nonprofit aspect is part of that mission alignment, and having the FBOs understand that the program is coming from enhancing and benefiting the churches and enhancing their capacity is a process to get them there to a point of understanding where the program and enterprise is coming from. But there's just a lot of bad history and to get over and build trust, to overcome that.
Riola, is being a part of the cohort easy?
Easy is an interesting word. So it certainly comes with a level of commitment, right? And so to some of the earlier points, if your heart is not in the right place, if you're not missionally driven, the fact that those meetings, those sessions come around pretty quickly in the midst of all the other things you have to do can be challenging. But when you're focused on the mission and there's a goal that's trying to be obtained, there's so many benefits that come from, and I think that's part of what happens as well. Even though it may be time consuming, the more information and the more acumen you gain, the more you want. And so I think anything worth having is worth working for. So I wouldn't call it easy, but it's certainly worthwhile.
Yeah, one of the things that I will add to this, and anybody who's thinking about being in a cohort, and especially those of you in the pastors in the Mid-Atlantic market, understand that accountability is one of the things that we hold very, very sincere and dear. If you're going to sign up for it, you're going to commit to it, and then I'm going to expect that commitment to show up. I know that you have services and funerals and congregations and lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. But part of the development process is having a leadership face that is going to be there consistently. And it's one thing, it's like being in any relationship. You can keep sending your representative, but eventually you're going to have to show up and say who you are and show who you are. And what we try to do in this process is to prepare you, as I've heard both these pastors say, prepare you to be able to carry the water that God is giving you to carry in this process, which is vital and important. You know, one of the things that I often share is that one of the things that we're looking for people to do is understand the difference between inheritance and legacy. An inheritance can be spent easily, but a legacy outlives those who leave it. That's what the important aspect and thing that we need to do. As we get ready to wrap up, we got about 10 minutes left. Again, I have prided myself in making sure we all had equal mic time. So Enterprise has been doing this work when we do the culmination of time for over a decade and a half. We've done, in this market alone, we've done cohorts in Baltimore that have connected with at least 23 houses of worship. We're getting ready to reconnect with 12 of them. We're getting ready to, as you heard, it was said earlier, in the District of Columbia alone, we'll have 29 houses of worship that we're working on. It was just announced last Friday that we're working on a partnership with the opportunity of 7 in Baltimore County. And across the country, they're happening in New York, in Atlanta, and Miami. And you know, that this is a movement and not just the effort. As each of you think about our cohort model and what we have presented thus far, what enhancements or changes do you see that will make this better? Let that sink in for a second. The clock is ticking. Everybody has about a good 92 seconds, I believe, if I work my math all right. I didn't major, by the way, in any math thing. I majored in English and journalism, so I can't really count that well, except dollars. No, but honestly, what are the things that you think that we can do to make this better? We would like to really hear from you sincerely. Who wants to go first? I've been picking, so now who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Go on.
So I'll say again, the cohort was absolutely phenomenal. But if I had to say an enhancement would be to spend more time going over the budget. I wish we could have spent more time going over the budget because it's such a vital part of your project.
Okay. All right. Well, do you get to go next, sir? Segment.
I guess I would suggest finding ways to help the FBOs with pre-development funding would be a potential enhancement. I know that there's a recoverable grant available, but that's I believe about 40,000 is the maximum. And as we know, the pre-development process is very, very expensive. Architects alone would cost you, $1 million or more. And I think the more the FBOs can develop their vision and get access to pre-development funding to actually refine it, the better they are in a position when they bring in a partner to have leverage in the discussion of a partnership.
I think you raised something that's interesting. So the more that the house of worship can do, when you say that they are at better leverage with the partner, is that in the joint venture opportunity saying that they can have more of a what? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
More of a role, potentially more access to interests, a stake in the partnership, because they've brought some additional resources to the table, and more control of potentially the results because they have done more homework on the vision.
Okay. Riolan?
My enhancement would be less programmatic, and it would just be more conceptual. I think one of the things that will work in the future of the cohort is to use graduates, if you will, as more of an ambassador. Listen, it was stated before many times. There's previous hurt, there's previous challenges that have taken place, but to have a pastor speak to another pastor and say, hey, this is good ground. hey, this is safe, this is missionally driven, I think goes a long way. Fortunately, full disclosure, I had that from you, but I think to utilize the resources of graduates of the program would benefit long term for the cohort overall.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the technical assistance that Enterprise provides to our houses of worship is a critical component of our FBDI work, and being able to point you in the right direction to give you the right resources, and that is a benefit. Vonette, what say you?
I've only had the benefit of participating in one cohort, so I don't have anything to compare it to. But what I would say is that maybe assessing the churches differently and to understanding where they are in the process. I know you guys go through everything, but I think when they're new to this process, it takes a little bit more time and coming up to speed and understanding things, and maybe doing 2 separate tracks for your more seasoned or more accelerated learners, and a track where you can go at a slower pace for your newer houses of worship that are entering a real estate transaction, because I think they need a little bit more hand holding.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did in the first DC cohort of 17 houses of worship, we had what we call the Tested 12 and the Fast 5. So the Tested 12 were houses of worship that had not gone through any training, based on the assessment and the organizational assessment that we did as well. And so we were able to put them in, but the other 5 had been through a level of training and had projects that were well more advanced. And so it gave us the opportunity to set 2 tracks. And so that's a work and effort that we do internally to look at. One of the things that I would tell you that we're looking at now too is the importance of that public-private relationship. So when you talk about getting more pre-development dollars, and is there a way for us to have the opportunity to use trust fund dollars in the municipality to help with some of those pre-development costs? Because many of the trust fund dollars can be spent on only pre-development work, and there are opportunities that exist there. So as we look to enhance that, one of the things that we're going to look to do is having these conversations with local municipalities and asking the question, you're right, the price tag can be $500K, $500,000 or $2 million, depending on where we are in the country. But are there dollars that we can help to bring to that, so that houses of worship can have the opportunity to have a better position in the deal? One of the things that I often share with houses of worship, and that is that, hey, you do bring something to the table. You bring your land, and don't let nobody minimize who you are in the relationship. But if you want to become a more solid player in the relationship, then you do have to make sure that, as both these pastors have said, that now they know what they didn't know, and then they know how to move forward, because it has helped them both because of the knowledge that they get. And the interesting thing is this: development is a process where you're always learning. Am I right? You're always learning. You're always learning, and you have to realize that you come to a place where you are constantly learning. An old preacher said to me years ago that after ripe comes rot. And I said, what do you mean? Well, you take a tomato and you sit in the window and it's green. It's going to go from green to orange to you're going to get them with a bunch of bugs around it if it sits there too long. So we have to continue to grow ourselves in this process. Yeah, I know I had to preach a little bit, didn't I?
Shout us, Doc. Shout us. Shout us. Shout us, sir.
We have to grow ourselves in this process. And see, David's coming on now because he's saying I got to stop preaching. But I just want y'all to know that we are excited about what we're doing in this process, and we're looking to make this a movement in every place we can across the country. But we're also looking to partnering with others, so that we're just not being the cog that's making it happen. The one thing that makes this work is that when we align ourselves through our faith, no matter where we are ecumenically, we are looking at a bigger picture. And that picture is not about us, but it's about those who will come after us. So I think that's my time, man, because I think I'm being kicked out of the.
They say amen, amen, and amen. Reverend Williams in the panel, Dr. Gould and Reverend Rioland, Vonette, and Shagun, we appreciate all of you all, and good words by way to close out our day for us. We appreciate you all very much, your insights and the work that you're doing every day. So my job is to take about 2 minutes and close us out for the day. And I want to say that as we close out, I really do hope, we all hope, that you've heard something today that has informed and inspired you. There is clearly great need in our land. There are many people, far too many, who are living in distress. But let us be clear. We have been blessed with great resources in this country. Land owned by houses of worship, certainly, as it relates to the topic we're talking about today, in religious denominations across multiple faiths. And there's plenty of brain power. I always say, if you want to find somebody who can build a building, there are builders out there. Design a building, there are designers. You need somebody who can figure out how to do 7 layers of financing. There are people all around the country who can do that. There's plenty of brain power out there on how to make a deal work. We got money, we got in the public sector, private sector, philanthropic sector, even in the faith community. Yes, there is money. So I pray that we will all live into what I like to call radical common sense and hear the calling to dramatically up our level of impact in the midst of all of this need and in the midst of all the blessings, to be transformationally relevant in our communities. Let me say that again, to be transformationally relevant in our communities. Just imagine, as we close, just imagine if tomorrow morning, all of a sudden, just 1% or 5% or 10% or 20%, one of every 5 houses of worship that you pass, a church, a mosque, a temple, whatever it may be, if tomorrow they all raised their hand and said, you know what, our land is available for some affordable, for faith-based development. Imagine the amount of affordable homes that could be built, rental and ownership, the healthy food places, the affordable daycare, the health clinics, the business incubators, the business accelerators. What's stopping us? What is stopping us from doing that? As you've heard today, this work is taking place as we speak. So let us broaden our vision and our commitment. As my former pastor, Reverend Dr. Joaquin Willis, and I used to joke about with each other, go big or go home. Right? The days of small thinking, the era of small thinking, of scarcity mentality, of being afraid to think big and to think intentionally about working with folks who we normally haven't worked with, that's got to be gone, because there is need and yet there is resource. So we are called to do more cohorts. Sure, Enterprise is going to do more cohorts. We pray that we will, and we'll continue to look to improve and go deeper and go wider. But there are going to be others out there doing cohorts all across the country, all across the land. That's what it means to build it into the code. So that's where we want to get to, where we build it into the code, where, again, doing this kind of work is just part and parcel of what this ecosystem of community development is doing, that faith communities are an integral part of the work to address the needs in our country. So let me end with the housekeeping notes of thanks, to let everyone know that all nearly 600 folks, again, who registered for this event, you will receive an email with a recording, a link to a recording of this entire session. So we hope that you'll be able to watch it. All will be able to watch it. Again, if you want to go back and refer to things, maybe follow up with some of the panelists, that you will also be able to share it with your networks as well. I want to say a huge word of thanks again to our sponsors, the Wells Fargo Foundation, Capital One, PNC, Care First, Blue Cross Blue Shield. We really, honestly, it sounds cliche, but it's true. Your dollars, your support are helping us to get this work done all around the country as we continue to build this movement. I want to say thanks to all of the panelists and the presenters today. It's no small feat to get prepared for this on the day, doing the day of, doing the tech checks before. It is a commitment of time. So thank you to all the presenters, the panelists, Reverend Luter with our invocation. Really thank all of you all. I want to say a shout out. So we don't do shout outs, but if we did, we would shout out West Peak Productions. Really proud to say that a BIPOC owned and operated production company behind the scenes did an excellent job today, as you all have seen, with the seamless transitions and high level of professionalism. So we want to thank West Peak Productions, and want to say a huge word of thanks and a shout out to my colleagues at Enterprise. Too many to name, but every single person at Enterprise who had anything to do with making today's summit a reality. And also those folks around the country who are doing work every day in markets from Seattle, from Seattle, Washington to Washington, D.C. and places in between, to make the FBDI a reality in communities around the country. So thanks to my Enterprise colleagues. Thanks to all of you all who attended today on the day of this taping. And also for those who will watch this in the future, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. And the final thanks, as you would know, at a faith-based development event, thanks be to God. Peace and God bless.